around long enough to know how the YouTube algorithm works, right? Sometimes you got to feed it. So when I say must own players for 2021, but I really love every single player that we're going to talk about today. And I think I can make a great argument as to why they should all be top targets of yours going into your drafts for 2021. If you agree with me, hit me up in the comments. Let me know what you think. If you disagree with me, well, eat shit. No, I'm kidding. If you disagree with me, I love going back and forth. That's what the fantasy community is all about. Hit me with a comment. I read all of them. I try to respond to all of them. And if you like these videos, hit that thumbs up. Helps us a ton. Again, YouTube algorithm. And subscribe to the channel as well if you haven't done so yet. Let's dive into it. But before we do, you got to check out Underdog Fantasy if you haven't done so yet. You've already heard me say it a million times if you've watched my videos in the past. I love Underdog Fantasy. It is by far my favorite platform for best ball drafts. They've got the $3.5 million best ball tournament going on right now, over $1 million to first. It's the biggest tournament in best ball history. It's fantastic. The platform's awesome. You can draft on the app, desktop, laptop, whatever you want. And if you use the promo code Awesemo, AWESEMO, you'll get $25 when you sign up and deposit. Use it on whatever you want. Man, it's been so popular lately that the $50K to first, $5 to enter puppy already filled up like a week ago, and we're not even in August yet. So I'm assuming we're going to see more of those type of tournaments as we draw closer to the season. If you want to draft now or you want to wait closer till we kick off for week one, whatever you want to do doesn't matter. But when you do it, when you sign up, use that promo code Awesemo, AWESEMO. Get your $25 injected into your account when you sign up and deposit using the promo code Awesemo. I'll see you over there. UnderdogFantasy.com. Julio Jones isn't worth more than a fourth-round pick? Seriously? I'd actually love to have this very debate on why Jones should have an ADP of 38, and I'm totally willing to listen. So if this is where you stand, leave a comment down below telling me why he shouldn't go in the first 3 rounds. But the injury-prone argument isn't going to get you very far, because while Jones dealt with a nagging hamstring injury all of last year and was on the field for only 9 games, he's played at least 14 games in each of his last 6 seasons. And in those seasons, he was the wide receiver 3, 2, 7, 6, 6, and 6. This year, Jones is being drafted as the wide receiver 17. So sure, the Titans have a 2,000-yard rusher in Derrick Henry and another elite receiver in A.J. Brown. But the Falcons had another alpha receiver in Calvin Ridley last year, and Jones was the wide receiver 3 in the 7 games that he played to completion. Yeah, you heard that right. In the 7 games Jones played from start to finish, he was the wide receiver 3, averaging 100 yards per game with a 76.3% catch rate, 11.9 yards per target, and 15.6 yards per reception. I totally understand. He's 32 years old now. He's getting up there in age. But Jones showed absolutely zero signs of age deterioration last year. Actually, he was incredible when on the field. Arthur Smith might be gone, with Todd Downing being installed as the new offensive coordinator in Tennessee. But it's hard to believe this Titans offense can't easily support 2 elite wide receiver seasons. They churned out 2 top 30 receivers last year, with one of them being Corey Davis, and the since departed Jonnu Smith caught 8 touchdowns on the year. Plus, there's no way Henry handles another 378 carries. The best part about all this is we don't need another top 5 season from Jones at his ADP. He just needs to be better than some of the 16 receivers going ahead of him. It's actually quite shocking that there are so many people out there who are unwilling to draft Ezekiel Elliott when they're sitting at the 5 spot in drafts. It's also funny how quickly we can flip our opinions on a player after one down or up season without providing any real context. Let me provide that context for you, and we'll start with the bad. Elliott averaged a career worst 4 yards per attempt last season. He also managed only 6 touchdowns on 45 red zone carries and 5 touchdowns on 26 carries inside the 5. Elliott failed to reach 1,000 rushing yards for the first time since 2017, where he had 983 yards in only 10 games. And finally, last season he averaged only 2.82 yards per contact after attempt. Pretty bad, right? On the surface, sure, this would be considered a wildly underwhelming season from Elliott. But that's without acknowledging everything that went wrong for Dallas in 2020. And Elliott was still the RB9 in PPR leagues. Moreover, Elliott was the RB2 through the first 5 weeks of the season before Dak Prescott was lost for the year.
Welcome. It is the Awesemo MLB Deeper Dive. 15 baseball games to break down today, and a little bit of uncertainty right now as it comes to the Pittsburgh Pirates because they recently traded Tyler Anderson to the Phillies, so not exactly sure who's going to be starting for them. That is something we're going to have to try to find a little bit more information on as the day goes on. But other than that, Adam, how are you doing today? How do you feel about the slate?
Doing pretty well and looking forward to the slate. Walked through it with Josh this morning on the strategy show and just thought it seemed like a pretty wide open slate where there's a lot of good pitching. There's enough good hitting spots to get to. The ownership kind of concentrates in some weird spots. At least it was earlier in the day. We'll, walk through that again now, but not much weather to contend with. Only the Boston and Toronto game, it looks like, from a rain standpoint. So it should be a pretty fun slate, I think. I hope. Can't be worse than yesterday was.
Yesterday, what's funny is there was a point in time where yesterday's slate looked like it was going to be okay for me, and then Luis Garcia just totally collapsed against the Mariners, and the Mariners stack ended up scoring a ton of runs all at once. Dylan Moore hit that grand slam, so there was a point in time where the slate looked not too bad, and then it all went south. And where it really started to look good was because both of us liked the Astros as a stack yesterday, and they didn't have that much ownership. They got off to a really good start, and then things went south really in a hurry, but. Let's start talking about today's games just because, 15 games, it's a lot to fit in. But guys, on your way in, do us a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, really helps us with the YouTube algorithm. And Adam and I appreciate it that we consider you friends if you do these things to help us out. But first game here we have on the slate to break down, it is the Miami Marlins at the Baltimore Orioles. The Marlins, for as poor of an offense as they have, they still have a pretty good pitching staff. Sandy Alcantara, one of the guys on the team that I actually like quite a bit. How do you feel about him going up against your Baltimore Orioles today?
Yeah, he's, I think, a pretty decent pitcher. If you look at his overall strikeout numbers this year, it's a little underwhelming for an $8,500 price tag. He struck out 21% of hitters, but I'm a little more optimistic than that number for this matchup against Baltimore. The Orioles are running 6 right-handed bats out there. The only lefties they have are Mullins, DJ Stewart, and then Domingo Leyba is a switch hitter. For the season, Alcantara has struck out 25.5% of right-handed hitters, only 17% of lefties. So you've gotten a pretty drastic split there, and he's getting a lot of right-handed bats here. So I think the ceiling's a little bit higher for him than it would be in some other matchups. The ballpark is not favorable going from Miami to Baltimore. It's hot and humid, as always, in Baltimore in July. But I think that for a pitcher not really getting much ownership, he's at about 5 to 6% right now. I do have some tournament interest just because I do think he has elevated strikeout upside here against Baltimore.
Yeah, and the price isn't really too egregious for him. We've seen Sandy Alcantara in some recent slates push over a 9,000 price tag. Today, 8,500 on DK. FanDuel, I don't really think we need to consider him at 9,300, but DK, where we need 2 pitchers, I think it's a favorable price. I don't mind the matchup either. There's a lot of pitchers to consider today, so it's not like a primary player or anything like that, but I think he's worth getting overweight to the field at his current projected ownership. And on the other side, for me personally, no real interest in Orioles stacks. I think there's plenty of better offenses to stack today.
Yeah, and for anyone that didn't catch the strategy show this morning, I think kind of a common theme on the show is going to be that on a lot of these low-owned pitchers, I like the idea of being a little bit overweight at the expense of the really popular ones because there's just a lot of good pitching, a lot of comparable guys, and Alcantara is one of the ones not getting a whole lot of ownership at a pretty loaded price range. So I'm with you, not a priority, but I do think that he's certainly has a decent chance of success here and someone that you can use in tournaments. As far as the Orioles bats go, not a whole lot for me. Austin Hayes, Ryan Mountcastle are always, I think, semi-appealing tournament options given just the power that they have. DJ Stewart's only 2,500, but with it being a 15-game slate, you have 29 other offenses to look to. Baltimore is not going to stand out that much for me.
And we do have also, if we're just talking about price points and direct pivots, the most popular pitcher on the slate right now in terms of DK projected ownership is Kenta Maeda, projected for 35% ownership at 8,200. So if you're looking for somebody in that same price range to pivot off them with, that's really where it makes sense to get to Alcantara, because we have Alcantara 6% projected ownership right around the same price. So that's a direct pivot that I think makes sense in larger field GPPs. On the other side of the mountain, do have Spencer Watkins going to be taking the hill for the Orioles, and he pitched pretty well his last time out. We don't have a whole lot of data on him in the big leagues to really know what to expect from him, but so far he's pitched 16 innings this year, 1.65 ERA, 4.23 expected ERA. The strikeout stuff hasn't been overwhelming at 20%. Walk rate a little concerning at 12.3%. But is there anything you've seen out of Watkins that you do like?
No, not really. I mean, well, the results have been pretty good, but in terms of, preventing runs, but there's still nothing that makes me think my initial take on him that he's just not a major league pitcher was wrong. He's not striking guys out. He's still got an xFIP north of 5. His ground ball percentage is 28.9%. He only has a 6% infield fly ball percentage. So he's, like, from a batted ball standpoint, he's not doing anything particularly good. He's not striking guys out. Against right-handed hitters, he's allowed that's the wrong person. He's allowed a 232 expected ISO compared to a 167 actual ISO. Against lefties, he's been good so far, but again, it's just a really small sample size too. So the fact that he has struck out 30% of lefties and hasn't allowed any expected power doesn't mean much to me. It's more so that I'm just looking to the right-handed numbers and saying, like, okay, he's struck out 11.5% of right-handed hitters so far. Normally for a right-handed pitcher, if he was just going to be like this sneaky late developing guy that didn't really show anything in the minor leagues and then is going to put it together in the majors, they're almost always going to have good numbers against same-handed hitters. He's not doing that. He's only struck out 11.5% with that 232 expected ISO. I think it's very likely the left-handed numbers move back towards the right-handed numbers as opposed to vice versa and him just being good against everybody. So Miami is getting some ownership here, and they're not a great offense, but I do think they match up pretty nicely here against Watkins. I really like the Marte, Aguilar, Duvall, Brian Anderson, kind of middle of that order, all guys that have power and are getting a positive park shift going into Camden Yards.
So something else that has to be really concerning about Spencer Watkins, number one, unheralded prospect. And whenever anybody just toils in the minor leagues for a really long time, that just always sends a red flag to me. And then you look at his numbers, the last full year we have on him in AAA. 2019 in AAA, Spencer Watkins, 7.98 ERA, 6.65 FIP. The strikeout stuff wasn't there. I tend to think he's also going to be not good at all. If you look at his steamer projection for the rest of the year, they have him projected for a 5.54 ERA, and that's pretty much all projection sources. If you look at it, if you go over to FanGraphs to see what they project him for, it's everybody. It's like in the 5.5 to even over 6 range. So Watkins, it stands to reason, is not going to be successful big league pitcher really at all. But on the other side, the Miami Marlins, it's not like they've had a prolific offense at all. It's a team that I can't really remember the last time that I stacked the Marlins at all. But today we have them project for a 6% ownership share, about a 5% chance to be a top stack. I think it's a little hard to quantify a pitcher like Spencer Watkins, but he's had such a lack of success that I don't even really care that the Marlins had a bad offense. I just think this is a good spot for them anyway because of how much Watkins has struggled.
Yeah, and with this being a 15-game slate, even teams that are getting a little bit too much ownership, relative to their top stack chances, they're not getting a ton of raw ownership. When you look at Miami on DraftKings, Adam Duvall is getting 14%, 9% apiece going to Aguilar and Starling Marte, 7% to Brian Anderson, 4.5 to Rojas. Just not a ton of ownership there. Pretty easy to stack Miami and then still just make your lineup contrarian enough elsewhere to put yourself in a pretty good spot. I do, again, just really like the ballpark upgrade here. It's not like it would be crazy surprising if Watkins has another just decent start where he kind of gets lucky and Miami doesn't do well because they're not a great offense. But it is, I do think they benefit from getting Brian Anderson back. That's a bat that typically does pretty well. And then again, it's just a nice park shift for them. Their implied run totals nearing 5, and I think Watkins should be bad much sooner than later.
Yeah, and by the way, somebody in the YouTube chat just mentioning, because I brought up that Spencer Watkins isn't a prospect. Wolfell said that he remembers when Jacob deGrom wasn't a prospect. Wasn't deGrom like a first-round pick, though? I mean, this is a long time ago, so I don't really remember. But I think he was actually converted from a shortstop or something.
Yeah, he played shortstop in college. He was a 9th-round pick.
Okay, I thought he was drafted higher. But I mean, either way, he was a shortstop and then converted to pitcher. So I wouldn't compare Spencer Watkins to Jacob deGrom, though. The other thing also, I mean, Watkins is 28 years old. It's taken him this long to make it to the major leagues. And the last time we saw him in the minor leagues, it was a 7.98 ERA, 6.65 FIP. I just don't think he's capable of getting out big league hitters. So
yeah, I mean, Watkins came up in the Tigers system. They need pitchers desperately, and he still couldn't make it to the majors. And for whatever reason, if we're going to use a Jacob deGrom comp, Jacob deGrom, when he was 26, struck out 25.5% of hitters in the major leagues. Spencer Watkins is 2 years older than that, and I don't think has ever even done that in the minor leagues.
Yeah, it's very lacking minor league success. Now, I understand from a standpoint of just being like Jacob deGrom wasn't considered one of the best pitching prospects in baseball or anything like that, but Watkins to me, I think is a write-off at this point. Next game on the slate here, Eric Fetty versus Matt Moore, the Nationals against the Phillies. So I'm just going to start with this because I don't think we're going to have interest in the pitchers here. But which pitcher do you think is worse and which offense is the higher priority to stack in this game?
Sorry, I was still reading the DeGrom comments.
Okay. So Eric Fetty versus Matt Moore. Of the two, which do you think is the worst big league pitcher and which offense do you prefer in this matchup?
I think Matt Moore is a lot worse than Eric Fetty. I'm interested in both offenses here, but as far as who's worse, I think Moore's the worst pitcher. I think I prefer the Nats offense. The only thing that hurts for the Nats is that their offense is kind of non-existent, like outside of Turner, Soto, Bell, and to some extent Harrison. You get a pretty watered down lineup, but it's still a good park to hit in. Matt Moore gives up power to both sides of the plate, and he really always has. It's not like it's just this year that he's struggled with left-handed power, but he has this year a 227 expected ISO allowed to lefties, 200 to righties. I mentioned it this morning that I love Juan Soto in tournaments. I think there's a pretty good chance that $6,200 salary on Soto kind of scares people away to some extent because of the lefty-lefty matchup. He's only projected for about 6% ownership, but Soto is someone that has just destroyed left-handed pitching in addition to right-handed pitching throughout his career. Matt Moore's never been very good against hitters from either side. He's had power issues to both sides. So I really like Soto. Obviously, I like Trey Turner. I like Josh Bell. And then you do get some salary relief on Washington from some of the weaker bats, like Alcides Escobar, like Carter Kieboom. So it's just a team that I like. I like the matchup against Matt Moore. I like the salary relief that you get as well from some parts of the order.
Yeah, and the other thing with Matt Moore, by the way, Matt Moore, former top pitching prospect. When Matt Moore broke into the big leagues, I think if I remember correctly, the Baseball of America rankings, it was Mike Trout 1, Bryce Harper 2, and Matt Moore 3 at that point in time. So and then Matt Moore was actually really good when he first broke into the league too. He first entered as a relief pitcher, he was throwing really hard out of the bullpen, and then he had a moderate amount of success as a starting pitcher, although always had terrible underlying numbers. Then just eventually caught up with him. Then as he got older, the velocity dipped quite a bit. But yeah, Matt Moore is somebody who's just not had very much success at this point in his career. 5.79 ERA, 5.12 expected ERA. So certainly somebody I think is worth stacking against. We've got a super chat here from Herb Dog. He said, "Thank you guys for your advice. Watch quietly every day and listen to your opinions. Got second in the 100K slam for 10K last night. Congrats to you. Also, if you want to take a screenshot, send it in. That will qualify you to make it into the Awesemo Hall of Fame. So congrats. That's really cool. And always like to see when people have big wins. And then talking about the Phillies side, their offense going up against Eric Fetty. Are there any individual hitters there that really stand out to you?
I think it's kind of just the obvious answers. Like JT Realmuto is always going to be one of the better catcher options. I like Bryce Harper at 6,100. I like Soto a little bit more, but obviously nothing wrong with Harper either. So those guys both stand out. You get a little bit of a salary discount in Rhys Hoskins. For the season, Fetty has been okay against both sides of the plate. 185 expected ISO to righties, 148 to lefties, about a 20% strikeout percentage to righties, 20% to lefties, 22.5 to righties. So just kind of decent. But again, like I think the Phillies have the advantage here against Fetty. I'm not looking to roster Fetty. I'm not shying away from Philadelphia, but yeah, it's kind of just like the whole lineup I think looks good. I think Harper, Realmuto are probably the top two.
Yeah, it's a game, good offense on both sides, but going about appropriately owned by the field right now. But either way, two offense I think that are worth having in our player pool. Next game on the slate, it is that Brewers Pirates game. So for those of you who missed the top or didn't see the trade, it was originally expected to be Tyler Anderson on the mound for the Pittsburgh Pirates. He has since been traded to the Phillies. So it is going to be Brett Anderson on the mound for the Brewers. I'm just searching. Have you seen a starting pitcher named? I know that on DK, they have it listed as Cody Ponce, but I'm not actually sure if that's the case.
I haven't seen anything other than the Tyler Anderson trade.
All right. So we could skip over the Brewers part and Pirates because
so I see what you're saying now. Yeah, on DraftKings, they have Ponce. It says he was recalled today from AAA.
Let's see if I do a Twitter search. Yeah, it still doesn't say that he's going to be starting. Like the last beat reporter thing I see is that Pirates are activating Rodolfo Castro and Cody Ponce, Tyler Anderson scratch. But yeah, no official starting pitcher name. So, stick around, guys. Something that we'll find either out later in the show or they'll have it on live before lock. Also, all the more reasons to subscribe to the YouTube channel, watch all the shows we have today because then we'll be live before lock. Will be right after us, and then they'll have a better idea of Are the Pirates rostering are the Pirates starting anybody we want to roster? Almost certainly that's going to be a no at starting pitcher, but it could impact how we want to stack the Brewers in this spot. But let's talk about Brett Anderson and his prospects as a pitching option tonight going up against the Pirates.
That's a pretty non-interesting thing to talk about, I think. So one other thing to add, Ponce did pitch on the 22nd. He went 6 innings, so it would make a lot of sense if he's getting the start today. But going back to Brett Anderson, I think pretty unnecessary on this slate. We're not lacking in pitching really at any price point here as far as guys that have ceilings go. Brett Anderson comes in with one of the lowest strikeout percentages on the slate at 14.2% for the season. The Pirates offense certainly isn't any good, and the park isn't bad for pitching, but there's just plenty of other guys you can go to that are going to strike out, or that normally are going to strike out more hitters than Anderson, or are going to just give you more fantasy points.
If this was a smaller slate, I'd actually like the Pirates as a stack. We have them graded out with a pretty good chance to be a top value stack. And Brett Anderson this year, he does have 4.26 ERA, but the underlying number is 6.43 expected ERA. You just mentioned his lack of strikeout stuff this year. So on a smaller slate, I think I'd like to get to the Pirates. Big slate, 15 games. I just find them to be unnecessary. I find Brett Anderson to be unnecessary. I think the most likely outcome here is the Pirates score like 3 or 4 runs, don't do anything spectacular for fantasy, and then we're probably going to get like 12 fantasy points out of Brett Anderson. Just nobody cares about either side of the game. So that's kind of where I stand on this one. Next game on the slate, it is the New York Yankees. Jordan Montgomery on the mound against Shane McClanahan. Now, I do know if you look at our betting tool they have over on Awesemo.com, which is free to use, we do have the Yankees as one of the best individual bets on the slate, them as a money dog, a money line underdog going up against the Rays. So that actually is something I put a little bit of money on. But that on top of it, Jordan Montgomery, somebody who I know you like a little bit. I don't think this is the best spot to roster him, but I think he's solid enough. I don't want to roster the Rays against him either.
Yeah, like I like the salary for him too on DraftKings at 6,700. He's getting 20% ownership right now. And I get it. You know, the park is favorable to pitch in. Jordan Montgomery has good stuff. You know, he's only 6,700 with a 24% strikeout percentage for the season. That's certainly nothing to sneeze at. And he's just a decent pitcher in general, about 1 home run per 9 innings, 4 flat xFIP. Tampa Bay is not my favorite lineup to target. They do have plenty of guys that can do damage. I mean, it's lefty, but you have Brandon Lau hitting 7th, Mike Zunino hitting 8th. Like, this is just a pretty deep lineup that if Montgomery's not on top of his game, can make life difficult. But at 6,700, I just think he's a little bit underpriced. There are a couple of other pitchers in that price range too that I think should get a little bit of ownership. So I wouldn't be surprised if I end up with less than the 20% we have Montgomery projected for right now. I think there are pivots, but I just think he should probably be like 7,700 instead of 6,700.
And then on the other side of the game, I'm kind of interested in, we don't have a Yankees starting lineup yet. And I know that some of the guys that were on the COVID list were close to returning. It looks like Judge is going to be activated today and potentially start. But given that we don't have that starting lineup yet, I think it's a little sketchy whether he actually ends up playing. But the last report we have is that he's expected to start today. If he ends up starting, by the way, that's another reason also that I think the Yankees money line kind of makes sense here. They're underdogs and they could be getting Aaron Judge back in the lineup. Assuming that this is a fully healthy Yankees lineup, there's been times where I think McClanahan's made sense this year just because of his strikeout upside. But I don't think there's a reason to go there on a big slate against a potentially healthier Yankees lineup.
Yeah, I like McClanahan. I like his stuff. He's got one of the higher strikeout percentages on the slate at 28.6%. He's only behind Robbie Ray and Dylan Cease. The biggest issue I have with him is that he's 9,300 on DraftKings and he's getting about 23% ownership. It's not that I think he shouldn't be getting ownership because, again, the strikeout stuff's really good. He's going deep enough into games to get you pretty solid scores. It's just that there's enough of a pitch limit concern on him, I think, at 9,300, that given the ownership he's getting, it just seems like it's pretty unlikely he can give you a score at 9,300 that like you absolutely have to have on this slate. He threw 93 pitches last time out, 91 the start before that, which was good. Prior to that, he was at 71, 87, 86. Typically, you're getting around 5 innings from him. He has a couple of starts where he went 6 innings, but only threw 86, 87 pitches. My point here is just that I don't really feel too strongly one way or the other, given where his ownership is. I think he deserves ownership because of his strikeout percentage. I just don't want to go too crazy with him because I don't really know exactly how high the ceiling is beyond those like 23 to 25 point games that we've gotten from him pretty frequently.
So for me, relative to ownership and where he's priced on DraftKings, I just prefer kind of everybody around him, like Dylan Cease for the lower ownership, Julio Urias, Robbie Ray. I think is going way under-owned at the top end of the pricing range. So there's just so many guys who I like, or even like Charlie Morton, who's kind of comparably owned. I just think is a better pitching option today. Just considering all those options around him, I just think it makes a whole lot of sense to come underweight to the field on McClanahan. If you look at the tools we have on the site, 23% projected ownership compared to a 13% chance of being one of the top 2 scoring pitchers. I just think there's a lot of other ways that I prefer to go, especially if the Yankees lineup is going to be healthier, which appears it's going to be the case. But once again, we don't have the official starting lineup yet. That's just something that looks like it's going to be the case. The Yankees are going to be healthy. So stay tuned for the Yankee starting line. If we get it during the show, I'll be reading that off. Next game we have on the slate here is the Boston Red Sox at home against the Toronto Blue Jays. As you mentioned at the top, there's a little bit of rain concern here, but not anything that's changing my lineups or anything. It looks like rain potentially later on in the game. If that moves up, then that'll become somewhat of a concern. But is this something that's actually causing you to change how you view these teams?
No, not right now. It's just something I'm keeping an eye on, hoping that nothing gets worse between now and lock. Hoping we don't randomly get Boston saying they're going to start in a delay, because that would get me to get off everything here. But yeah, assuming that we don't get any sort of delay and assuming that the forecast doesn't change, I'm just going ahead with this game.
And then what do we make of the offenses here? Well, let's start with, because it's going to be different. So first, let's talk about Robbie Ray and just how under-owned he is as a pitcher. Now, I think there is cause for concern with Robbie Ray because he's been pitching well over his head relative to the other results that he's had so far this season. But because he struggled his last time out, I think that there's a massive overreaction to Robbie Ray and his ownership because the strikeout upside is still there in a big way. For the season, 31.3% strikeout rate for Robbie Ray. It is the type of matchup where he could give up runs, but I don't think it's out of the realm of possibilities that he could give up 3 or 4 runs and still have a big fantasy game. He's only picking up single-digit ownership, and he's somebody who, just a couple of weeks ago, people were talking about as a potential Cy Young candidate. I thought that was a little bit far-fetched, but he's still an elite fantasy option because of all the strikeouts. So he's actually my overall favorite pitching option on the slate on both FanDuel and DK, just because of the strikeout upside and that he's going a little bit overlooked by the field.
Yeah, we had this exact matchup last week, and Ray was getting more ownership. It was a smaller slate, so Boston was getting more ownership in terms of raw numbers as well. But I had basically said then that I wanted to be on both sides because I thought that it just had extreme boomer bust potential for both sides. Robbie Ray has struck out 30% of right-handed hitters this year. He's also allowed a 193 expected ISO to righties. Overall, he has struck out 31.1% of hitters, but Boston just has a ton of right-handed power. So Robbie Ray can throw up a monster score here. He also can just get lit up by the Red Sox. Today, it's a little bit different because on that slate, you were getting ownership going to Ray, and you were getting some going to the Red Sox, but not quite. They were going a little bit under-owned by the top stack tool. Today, it's a little bit different because you have a lot less ownership going to Ray, partly as a function of the other options on the slate, and then partly, I think, just people being scared off by the Red Sox here. And you have a little bit of ownership going to Boston, a little bit more than their top stack percentage suggests they should be getting. So with the way it sets up right now, whereas I actually leaned a little bit heavier towards Boston the last time these two faced each other, I'm leaning more towards Robbie Ray just because I think that there's a little bit more leverage there. I think Ray is going a little bit more under-owned relative to his ceiling than Boston is relative to theirs.
Yeah, and by the way, some news we just got is that Javi Baez has been scratched from the Cubs lineup. However, they are saying it is an injury. It is a heel injury, not a trade, but something
doesn't
else
want to be thrown out tonight.
Yeah. Hey, listen, the Amir Garrett started it. It wasn't like this was the first time they've had a back and forth, but that was a pretty entertaining end of the game. But either way, that is definitely going to weaken the Cubs lineup today. But Garrett Richards, somebody who I've certainly been really low on ever since the foreign substance rules came into effect. He struggled a whole bunch since then. He's given up a whole bunch of home runs. You have mentioned that as of late, he does appear to have found a little bit of a changeup that could be a weapon for him going forward. What do you make of the matchup for the Toronto Blue Jays today? Because I think it's pretty hard to deny anything other than that this is still a really good spot for them.
Yeah, I still think it's a good spot. Like, I'm not going to point to Garrett Richards having a new changeup and say like, oh, this single data point makes it go from arguably the best spot on the slate to a spot I'm not going to target. I think it's just worth noting because for one, maybe it makes you a little bit more hesitant to go to Toronto. And for two, it's definitely something to pay attention to because if we see Richards come out today and he threw it about 25% of the time against Toronto in his last start, had a 17% swinging strike percentage overall in that game. If we see him come back and go to that changeup again and have success with it, then that's one more start where, you kind of put in the bank and say, okay, we've seen Richards do this a couple of times now. Maybe we can start to buy into him just having sort of figured out his issues. But, overall, just thinking in terms of ceiling and range of outcomes, Toronto still looks very good to me. They are getting some ownership, but they're also at the top of the top stack pool today. So I do like Toronto. I just mentioned the change up for Richards because I think it is important when, especially with someone like Richards, we've made the point of saying, this is a guy that once they crack down on the sticky substances, he said like he had no idea how to pitch anymore, basically, and that he was going to have to develop new things. He's developed a 90-mile-an-hour changeup with a lot of arm side run that was really effective his last time out. So it's definitely something to at least keep in the back of your mind and pay attention to tonight.
Yeah, and then the other thing that's still kind of funny about him is so, overall people look at Garrett Richards like, oh my God, he one of his, best starts in recent memory. It's still, all right, he pitched 5 2/3 innings, he gave up 3 home runs and 4 earned runs. He just happened to be lucky that nobody was on base at that point in time, but, he's still an 8.8 FIP for the game. So I don't really have too much concern stacking against Garrett Richards. And as of right now, the Blue Jays are actually my favorite stack on the slate.
Yeah, I was going to say, for one, he still didn't dominate that start. He just had better swinging strike stuff than he normally does. And then someone in chat made the point too that they just saw the changeup. I'm not buying into that as far as it necessarily means that they're going to hit it. But I do think it's important because I'm pretty sure going into that game, Toronto had no idea that pitch even existed. So you saw kind of the first couple of innings, these guys were just swinging they did not know Garrett Richards threw a changeup, and then you're seeing them go back to the dugout and pull out the iPads and look what the hell did this guy just throw me? So again, I'm not saying I necessarily think because they've seen it they're going to hit it now, but they at least going into this game know that Garrett Richards has this pitch, which I don't think they did last time.
Yeah, it was definitely something. And I'm pretty sure actually because I wasn't watching the game at the time, I think the way I found out was just from seeing you tweet about it on Twitter, and I just banked that in the back of my head to ask you about it the next time we did a show together because. That was how I became aware. It was also another slate where I remember there was a handful of games, so I was kind of flipping around watching a bunch of stuff and wasn't aware at the time. Today's show is sponsored by No House Advantage. If you guys are new to No House Advantage, different way to play fantasy sports. Instead of building lineups or making lineups with any kind of salary restraints, this is prop-based contest. You're making a lineup card based on player props. You're taking overs and unders. You're picking 10 props, labeling them on a confidence interval of 10 to 1. If you're 10-point prop hits, you get 10 points. If you're 1-point prop hits, you get 1 point. And whoever scores the most points at the end of the day wins. There's still GPPs, there's cash games, all that stuff over at No House Advantage. If you guys want to try it out, head on over to the site. Use the promo code Awesemo. You get up to a $20 instant match deposit bonus. All right, moving on. The next game we have on the slate here, it is Adam Wainwright on the mound in Cleveland to take on the Indians. So Adam Wainwright this year, there just hasn't been very many slates where I've rostered him. He's not picking much ownership today, but he's always in the situation to me where relative to his strikeout upside, I just don't think that there's enough reason to want to play him. We have him today, 9,700 on DK. He has a 22.7% K rate. It's a reasonable matchup against the Indians, but it's still it's a 9,700 on FanDuel for Wainwright, and then on DK is 8,800. But that aside, he's still picking up a little bit of ownership on DK, and there's just a lot of other guys I prefer to target. But is Wainwright making it into your player pool?
No, I think it's just tough for me to get there on this slate. He's been better this year than I expected him to be. I kind of thought Wainwright's career was over a couple of years ago and that he was just playing out the stretch, but he's actually been a pretty good pitcher. The issue for me is the same thing that you said. The strikeout percentage is fine. He's got a 22.7% strikeout percentage, but on this particular slate for 8,800, you can just get a lot more strikeout upside. I'm also a little bit concerned by Cleveland having a 4.7 implied run total because this is a team that typically just doesn't have high implied run totals, so it just kind of stands out. They do have Franmil Reyes in their lineup. He was questionable for today, so that's another bat that he'll strike out, but he also can do a lot of damage in a hurry. So ultimately, I just kind of think Wainwright's unnecessary on this particular slate.
Yeah, there's a lot of guys priced around him that I think have more upside, and he should be a little bit cheaper considering the kind of strikeout stuff he has. Plus, he's on the road. He's going to be pitching in American League ballpark because he faced a DH instead of a hitter. That's something that's a little bit of a concern. But on the mound for Cleveland today is going to be Cal Quantrill. His 3.84 ERA looks fine on paper, but you start to dig into some of the underlying stats. He has a 5.33 expected ERA, 4.31 FIP. He's been a little lucky this year with a 292 BABIP, also a 75.4% strand rate. Going up against the Cardinals team, which, I don't think they have a great offense, but also once again, moving to an American League ballpark to get out of the benefit of a DH in the lineup. I kind of think this is a good contrarian team to get to because I think Quantrill is going to regress going forward.
Yeah, I like the Cardinals a bit here too. I wish they had more left-handed bats. I think that's something I've said multiple times recently. But I'm with you. I just think Quantrill as a whole takes a step back. Since the start of last season, he's allowed a 162 expected ISO to righties, 159 to lefties. This year, the split's been a little bit more drastic, 208 to lefties, only 115 to righties. But he's only struck out 12% of right-handed hitters. So you're still in a situation where you expect Paul Goldschmidt, Nolan Arenado, Tyler O'Neill, all to put the ball in play. Harrison Bader, I think, is a good tournament play because he has power and speed. He just strikes out an insane amount of the time, but Quantrill doesn't pick up a lot of strikeouts. And then at the top, you have Dylan Carlson at 2,900, who I think is the best play on the Cardinals. But overall, I do just think it's a nice low-owned spot. They have an implied run total approaching 5, kind of going overlooked a little bit, I think. And it just looks like a pretty good spot against Quantrill.
Yeah, and once again, low-owned team, I think they're one of the stacks worth having in the player pool as one of the lower-owned stacks. So that's where I'm at with them. Not like a super high priority team, but if you're playing, mass multi-lineups, I think it's worth being a little bit overweight to the field on them at low ownership. Next game we have here, it is going to be Charlie Morton, one of the chalk pitchers on the slate, going up against Garrett Eickhoff for the Mets. So let's start with the Morton side because he's picking up a whole bunch of ownership. Do you think it is warranted today?
Not really. I don't know. It's like, I think he should be getting ownership because I think he's a very good pitcher. I think the matchup is okay against the Mets. I don't know that 25% is warranted in the context of the slate where he's getting 3 times the ownership of Robbie Ray, who's $300 more. He's getting twice the ownership of Julio Urias, who's $800 less. He's getting more ownership, a little bit more ownership than McClanahan, who's $500 less. He's getting 5 times the ownership of Dylan Cease. In that way, like compared to other guys, I don't think it's warranted. I don't mean it in the way of like, I think Charlie Morton's a bad play or, the Mets are going to do well or anything like that.
Yeah, it's also with Morton. So something else about him is not only is he really popular on DK, FanDuel for a single pitcher site, he is crazy popular. 25% projected ownership going to Charlie Morton. That makes him by far the most popular pitcher on FanDuel, just updating ownership to make sure that's still the case. And yes, it is. So we've got Charlie Morton at 25% projected ownership, Kenta Maeda at 17.6. So the two of these guys are going to be picking up nearly 50% of the ownership on a single pitcher site. So, I think if you're playing on FanDuel, the easiest way to differentiate in large field GPP is just play anybody at pitcher who isn't Charlie Morton or Kenta Maeda. I don't have an issue with either of them. I just think they're picking up a little bit too much ownership. So, FanDuel, we talked about Robbie Ray before. He's only projected for 2% ownership. I think that's a really good pivot off of Charlie Morton. I think Charlie Morton's okay to have in the player pool. I just don't want to have as much exposure to him as the field does.
Yeah. And I do think Morton's the cash pitcher on FanDuel at 8,600. It's just more of, like what you were saying with tournaments, you're only rostering one pitcher. So there's a ton of guys on the slate that have similar range of outcomes to Morton, even if their point per dollar projection isn't quite as good. On DraftKings, he's really expensive at 9,800, so $1,200 more than on FanDuel. I think he's in consideration for cash. I haven't built a cash lineup, but I think it's kind of between like Morton, McCullers, Kenta Maeda, most likely. So I think he's fine for cash on DraftKings. I think he's the guy on FanDuel.
And then on the other side of the mountain, it is going to be Garrett Eickhoff pitching for the Mets. Now, his results this year have been no good. And, it's going back a little bit now. It's a little hard to know what to make of Eickhoff because he didn't pitch in 2020. He's also dealt with a ton of injuries as of late. So it's always uncertain, how healthy this guy is. And even though this year he does appear to be at full health, he's a 4.96 ERA, 8.72 expected ERA. Here's the issue, though. According to our top stacks tool, we currently have the Atlanta Braves as the most negatively leveraged stack of the entire day. The top stacks, which, by the way, is free over at Awesemo.com. If you guys want to check it out, go to Awesemo, look at the top stacks so you can see each lineup, what they're projected for in terms of ownership, what their odds are being the top scoring team of the slate. Given the current ownership data we have on the Braves, this looks like one of the most over-owned teams of the day.
Yeah, given what we have right now, I agree. And if it looks like that at lock, then obviously I will still agree. I will say I wouldn't be surprised if we see Atlanta's top stack percentage jump because I just don't understand why it's so low. Like they have their implied run total is 5. By comparison, St. Louis is 4.9, and they have almost a 5% chance of being a top stack where Atlanta's around 3%. I don't know if maybe our stuff's just not fully accounting for Eickhoff yet, but Eickhoff has been really bad this year. So again, it's something I will be paying attention to. If it looks like this around lock, then yeah, I'll just stay away from Atlanta and hope for the best. But I think that Atlanta's in a very good spot.
Yeah, and the other thing with Eickhoff too, only a 28.6% ground ball rate and a 23.1% home run to fly ball rate. So there is reason to think it's a good spot for the Braves. As of now, it just looks like a little bit too much ownership, but we'll see where that ends up settling. But Any individual hitters from the Braves that stand out to you here?
Most of them. But Freddie Freeman obviously is is the answer all the time. The salary on Ozzie Albies really jumps out at $4K. This is someone that normally is between 4,500 and 5K, if not more. So that stands out. Austin Riley against a pitcher that doesn't get a lot of strikeouts, only 15% against right-handed hitters so far this year. Austin Riley, has a lot of power, has contact issues, but can put the ball in play. And then Jock Peterson is really cheap as well. So I just like the top of the Braves lineup a lot. I really like Freeman, of course. I really like the salaries on Albies and Peterson.
Yeah, and it's once again, we'll see where the data updates to. Right now, the Braves look a little bit overowned, but with that in mind, it's still, to me, I think this is one of the best spots on the slate. So it is something that if we weren't considering ownership, I would want to get to them a ton. Next game here is going to be Vlad Gutierrez on the mound against Adbert Alzolay. So the first thing we have to talk about here is, by the way, I have no interest in Vlad Gutierrez. I kind of wish the Reds had a decent starting pitcher on the mound, just because I think a lot of times these are good spots to target where you just have a decent starting pitcher that's maybe not picking up ownership. They'll be going against an offense that just had one of their best players scratched in Javi Baez. But Gutierrez is a pitcher that we would normally like to stack against. With Baez no longer being in the lineup, how does that impact how you view the Cubs as a whole?
Well, the problem is it makes them cheaper. The Cubs kind of just, they have the potential to just absolutely wreck the slate and make it just a miserable slate because they're getting tons of ownership right now, and they should be. I mean, this is a game where it's warm in Wrigley, the wind's blowing out. You have a $2,400 guy leading off. You have a $2,200 guy hitting fifth. The six hitter is $2,900. And then, oh, by the way, 2 through 4 is Chris Bryant, Anthony Rizzo, Wilson Contreras, who actually are good hitters, and none of them are even 5K. So it's a team where you can stack that you can stack a team with a 6.1 implied run total and then still roster basically whatever you want around it because of how cheap they are. They're going to get tons of ownership. The problem is that it's also a very, very good spot because not only is it excellent hitting conditions, but you're going up against Vladimir Gutierrez, who has struck out 15% of hitters this year while walking 10%. He's allowed 1.8 home runs per 9, 5.75 xFIP. The guy's just been absolutely awful at basically everything. So there's nothing to point to and say, oh, this is why I think the Cubs are going to struggle. I don't think the Cubs are going to struggle. I'm going to just end up playing other teams and hoping that somehow they don't light up Gutierrez.
Yeah, and by the way, talking about Gutierrez, we do have in our MLB player props tool under 4.5 strikeouts for Vladimir Gutierrez. That does project as a bet with a 19% expected ROI. And by the way, I just realized I did misspeak before because I said that the Braves had the most negatively leveraged stack on DraftKings, but it's actually the Cubs, and I kind of glanced over that. But the Cubs crazy negatively leveraged. So how are you going to handle them in terms of 5-man stacks and large field GPPs? Because it's such a good spot. Is it a thing though where they're going so highly owned relative to our projections that you would want to be off them entirely?
Typically in spots like this where a team's getting a lot of ownership, but it's also because they're really good values, I end up mixing them in. Like I normally end up getting less than the field, but I'll still mix them in on lower owned teams. And this is another one where I know you've made the point before, and so have I. Some teams get a lot of ownership, but you can find low owned guys in the lineup. That's not the case here. We have Jason Hayward projected for the lowest ownership on the Cubs on DraftKings at 10.5%. Chris Bryant leads the way at 22%. So there's no way to 5-man stack this team and not have, just tons of ownership going to your stack. So that's kind of the problem. I'm still fine, mixing in guys for value if I need to on teams that are contrarian, low owned teams. But I would fully expect to just be underweight on the Cubs here and hope for the best.
Yeah, so it's certainly a good spot, but kind of similar to what we talked about with the Braves before. It does look like, according to our numbers, that there is a little bit too much ownership going to them. Tough spot to totally ignore, but once again, it's a whole bunch of ownership. And this is a 15-game slate. So there's a whole bunch of offenses, and you just have to ask yourself from a math perspective, does one team have greater than a 20% chance to be the top scoring team of the day when there's 30 teams to choose from? Because that is where we're at with the Cubs. They're picking up, I'll refresh to make sure this is correct, but last I looked, 18% projected ownership. So you really need to have them expected to be the top scoring team on the slate, like 1 out of 5 times or greater, to be a team that you want to stack overweight to the field. And that's probably just not the case because we have them with a 6.7% chance to be a top stack of the day, which is all well and good, but I would rather pay for a team like the Toronto Blue Jays, because the Blue Jays, we have an 11.2% chance to be a top stack, whereas the Cubs have a 6.7% chance. But at the same time, the Cubs are also picking up 17.5% ownership compared to 10% for the Blue Jays. So that's why if I'm paying up for an offense or going to one of these offenses in a really good spot, give me the Blue Jays against Garrett Richards as opposed to the Cubs, just because of the ownership here. And then we have Adbert Alzolay is going to be on the mound for Chicago. Obviously a great offensive environment, but Alzolay's been okay this year. So are the Reds a team that you're looking to get to?
Yes, because I think that I just like taking the other side of the Wrigley game when all the ownership is going to one side. You're getting 17.5% aggregate ownership on the Cubs, only about 4% going to Cincinnati. I do think Adbert Alzolay is a decent pitcher. He's been particularly good against right-handed bats, and the Reds lineup is pretty balanced here. You don't have any strings of left-handed hitters that are going to just, like back to back to back, make life difficult for Alzolay. So that's a little disappointing. It's still, I think, a potent offense, though. India offers some power and stolen base upside. Winker offers power. Stevenson, Votto, Suarez, Naquin all have some power as well. So they can still do damage here in favorable hitting conditions. And you're getting like 1/5 or 1/4 the ownership that you're getting on the Cubs. So even though I think that Alzolay is a markedly better pitcher than Vladimir Gutierrez, I like the ownership on the Reds better than I do on the Cubs.
Yeah, and still, I think the Reds are a team that are probably about appropriately owned, because we do have Alzolay. One thing that's good about him is he does generate swing and misses. He's a fairly high strikeout rate, 25.3%. So one thing about him and his ability to pitch is, he is the type of guy who maybe would be able to suppress some of the damage when it's a windy game at Wrigley. Because of the potential home runs, I think the Reds are worth stacking. But once again, just a team that I think, 4% stacks or so, that's probably about fair to me, not anything that's a crazy high priority. Next game we have here, the Texas Rangers at home against the Arizona Diamondbacks. Dane Dunning's going to be on the mound for Texas. Taylor Widener for Arizona. My takeaway here, I don't really like the pitchers all that much. I don't really like the offenses. 15-game slate. We need to find some spots to cut out, and everything here just kind of looks whatever to me.
Yeah, not a whole lot else, I don't think.
So yeah, with that in mind, we could just kind of skip over. We got 15 games to talk about, and this is a spot I don't plan on getting exposure to. So game after this, Kansas City Royals at home against the Chicago White Sox. Brad Keller versus Dylan Cease. So let's start with Dylan Cease because he's a pitcher that I've actually rostered a ton this year in tournaments. And his results this year have been a little bit mixed, but the main takeaway I have from Dylan Cease is that he's never picking up much ownership. He always makes to me a pretty good pivot off of more chalky pitchers. And he has strikeout upside. So we only have him with 6% projected ownership today compared to a 12% chance to be one of the top 2 scoring pitchers on the slate. The Royals offense, middle of the road, it's not anything I really fear. And then you just look at the numbers for Dylan Cease, the 29.5% K rate. That's the main thing that stands out to me compared with the ownership. So Dylan Cease actually is one of the stronger GPP plays today.
Yeah, I get why the ownership's as low as it is, but at the same time, I kind of don't because he's got the second highest strikeout percentage on the slate at 29.5%. He's got a decent matchup against Kansas City. I mean, it's a team that they have enough power. They can do some damage, but they also have a lot of strikeouts in this lineup. Not the most imposing lineup overall. And then you've also gotten a price discount on Cease. Like, whereas we talked about Charlie Morton being 9,800 after for a while being like 8,700, you've sort of gotten the opposite treatment for Cease, who was 8,600 last start against Minnesota. But prior to that, he was normally 9,600. So you've seen the salary come down. The strikeout numbers are very, very good, as I mentioned. The walks are a little bit higher than you would like, but that's made up for a bit by the fact that the salary came down. And then he's not getting ownership. Like if 35% of the field is going to go to Kenta Maeda against the Tigers, I get it. Like I get that it's a good spot, but you can't tell me Kenta Maeda is going to outscore Dylan Cease like 7 out of 8 times when Dylan Cease has a strikeout percentage like 5 points higher than Kenta Maeda is.
Yeah, and he is on the road. The matchup against the Royals, it's not daunting. It's not great either, but it's just an ownership thing here where, like we said before, and that's one of the reasons we talk about ownership a lot in terms of baseball, because this isn't a sport like basketball for people who are just jumping in from NBA and maybe are newer to MLB DFS. The reason ownership matters so much is it's so much harder to predict, and there's so much more variance in a sport like basketball, where generally NBA, if somebody's starting at point guard at min price, there's a pretty good chance they're going to have a good game, and there's not that high of a probability they bust. For MLB DFS, the results are all over the place. And so with that in mind, that's why it makes so much sense to compare the ownerships to players and just try to compare the range of outcomes. Because right now, if you look at our top pitchers tool, Dylan Cease, we have projected for a 5% projected ownership, Kenta Maeda 35%. But the odds of these guys being one of the top 2 scoring pitchers on the slate, it's 13.4% for Maeda, 12.4% for Cease. The range of outcomes for these guys is really similar. Just we have Maeda with 7x the ownership. So that's really why I think Cease really makes for a strong GPP play today. So we're on the same page there. Other side, Brad Keller on the mound going up against the White Sox. Keller struggled quite a bit this year. He was good last year from an ERA perspective, although his underlying numbers weren't as good. This year, 5.84 ERA, 6.43 expected ERA. I think Keller's one of the worst starting pitchers going tonight.
I agree. And I'm going right back to the White Sox after they cost me like $4,000 last night, doing absolutely nothing. So they have the second highest top stack percentage on the slate. It's about half of Toronto, or a little above half of Toronto, but only getting about 4.9% ownership compared to a 6.9% top stack percentage. They have a lot of power in this lineup. And Brad Keller just doesn't miss a lot of bats. When he first came up, he had some success getting a lot of ground balls, but that's just a profile that typically doesn't last that long in the major leagues. And it hasn't for Keller. A 4.58 xFIP isn't terrible, but it's not good. 1.15 home runs per 9, only an 18.7% strikeout percentage. When you look individually at specifically lefties and righties, he's allowed a 197 expected ISO to righties with only a 14.7% strikeout percentage. 195 expected ISO to lefties with a 22% strikeout percentage. The White Sox just have so much power in this lineup from both sides of the plate. Everyone from, really the entire lineup, but specifically Tim Anderson down through Brian Goodwin just has power in their bats. You have Eloy Jimenez back in the lineup at 2,500. He didn't do anything yesterday, still looked a little rusty at the plate, but you're still getting basically a free price tag on him as well. So I'm going right back to Chicago and hoping things work out a little bit better.
Were you surprised that Eloy wasn't chalky last night? I thought that he was just going to end up being just a crazy popular bat. For whatever reason, the field kind of ended up getting off him as we got closer to the slate. I still view him as one of the best individual one-offs on the slate. Is he also likely going to be one of your higher owned hitters today?
Yeah, I think so. And I was a little surprised. I think he ended up being like 15 to 20% in large field tournaments on DraftKings yesterday. But as you got into smaller stuff, like I think in the $555, I think he was like 35% owned or 40% owned. In the $150 three max, he was like 40% owned. So it was definitely one of those where you saw his ownership skyrocket as he moved up in stakes.
Yeah, but definitely lower. I think in like the $5, was it called the knuckleball yesterday? I think he was like 19 or 18% owned. I just thought he was going to be somebody who's like 30% owned GPPs. And I usually don't roster that much of chalky hitters, but he was so cheap, Eloy, that thought it just made sense to get to him. And going right back to it today, even though he didn't really find success at the plate, I think, sooner or later, he's going to get going. Yesterday, when we were talking about Eloy, I talked about his historical pricing and how I think that's a good benchmark for what we should expect from guys from a fantasy perspective. And most of the end of last year, Eloy was somebody who's priced in the high 4K to mid 5K range on DK. So I expect Eloy to get going sooner rather than later, and I'd rather be ahead of it than behind it. So somebody who's going to be a pretty high priority for me on this slate. By the way, guys, if you haven't done it yet, do us a favor, like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. That will make your lineups 13% more likely for your team to be the highest scoring stack today. That has been backed by good research and math, and is also not going to pop up in the top stacks tool, but trust me, it's good math. It's all true. Next game that we have here to talk about, it's going to be Kenta Maeda, who we have to talk about as a chalk play today, going up against the Detroit Tigers. So we've kind of got a funny spot here with Maeda, because how many slates in a row have the Tigers been chalk at this point? It's been like 2 weeks of the Tigers being chalk every day. The offense has sputtered a bit after a pretty long stretch of hot hitting. Now they've cooled off and everybody's pivoted in the other direction. Everybody's rostered the Tigers over last week. All those people are flocking to roster Kenta Maeda now. Is this a spot to finally go back to the Tigers now that Maeda is popular and nobody's playing Detroit anymore?
I think it really, really, really depends on what tournaments, what contests you're playing. Obviously, you're not looking here in cash, but even in smaller field tournaments, I don't think Detroit should be popping towards the top of what you're trying to do, whether it's a single entry, a three max, or just a higher stakes, smaller field buy-in. I think in like the massive field, whatever like DraftKings is running today, $18 or $11, whatever it is, with 100K at first. That's where I think it makes some sense to look to Detroit, because they're a very, very low probability stack. And that's one, because they're not very good. Two, Kenta Maeda is pretty good. And three, there's 29 other teams, most of which have better hitters than the Tigers do. But you just have so many lineups to beat. It becomes a little bit more important to knock off 35% of them if you can, with the Tigers having a good game. Whereas in smaller field stuff, I'm not as concerned about knocking off 35%, because that raw number is just so much lower. So really depends on what contest we're talking about, I think.
And then on the other side, how are you going to handle Kenta Maeda today? I think for DK, he makes for an excellent cash game play, just because he's going to have a lot of ownership, and he has pitched, okay this year. It has been a little bit disappointing for Kenta Maeda relative to what we normally see from him. He has a 4.63 ERA, a little unlucky to be like that though, because the 3.81 expected ERA. The BABIP is high, 321. The left on base rate, that's also a little low at 68.7%. Those things are all going to normalize. but this is still a lot of ownership going to a pitcher who's just kind of been mediocre this year. So what are you looking to do with Kenta Maeda in cash games and in tournaments today?
Yeah, I agree. He's a good cash option. I would expect that the three pitchers that kind of show up in cash builds are Morton, McCullers, and Kenta Maeda. And it's just a function of which ones you end up on. Is just kind of a function of like what bats you can fit into your lineup. But I think Maeda probably opens up a lot for you. In tournaments, though, it's not that I think he's a bad option, but I just don't really think any of the pitchers on this slate that are getting a lot of ownership are drastically better than like two or three pitchers around them. And it's no different for Maeda. We already talked about Dylan Cease, who's getting 1/7 of the ownership. You have Julio Urias, we already mentioned, he's $800 more, but he's getting 1/3 of the ownership. There's just, other pitchers that you can pivot to in that price range. Alzolay getting 1% ownership. Not that I'm in love with Alzolay or Alcantara for that matter, but there are also guys that have similar ceilings as Maeda does. So I just think he's getting a little bit more ownership than he should. That's backed up by the top pitchers tool as well. As you mentioned before, 13.5% chance of being a top two pitcher for Maeda, 12.5% for Cease, 15.4% for Urias at a little bit higher price point, 6.8% for Alcantara. So basically twice as likely to be a top two pitcher as Alcantara, but getting 7 times the ownership. That's just a spot where, you don't have to make that pivot in tournaments. You can just, especially if you have lower owned hitters, you're okay to go to Kenta Maeda, but it's just not a spot where it's not a bad decision if you do want to go that route.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too, though, with him is talking about the ownership, how it's too high, and not to rehash some of the same old points. But I mean, we have Dylan Cease projected almost the same as Maeda, and he's a little more expensive. But what does the $400 really mean on a slate this size? So to me, there's a lot of guys I'd rather get to than Maeda. I'm not saying you have to have 0%, but I'd certainly want to be underweight to the field, and I think there makes for a lot of good pivots we've already brought up. If you want to pay up, Robbie Ray, even Charlie Morton is coming in with less ownership, at least on DK. FanDuel is going to be a different case because Morton's really popular on FanDuel, as is Maeda. But there's a lot of good pivots in this price range that I think I would like to get away from Maeda. And I think the Tigers make for a good leverage stack just because for a slate this large, it's uncommon to see a mediocre pitcher pick up that kind of ownership. So I think that is something to consider for your mass entering lineups. On the other side is going to be Tyler Alexander on the mound for the Tigers going up against the Twins. Now, the Twins lineup has been all over the place in terms of success and failure as of late. They've been chalky and gone and failed. They've been low owned and gone off. Is this a spot where you're looking to get to the Twins offense?
Yeah, I do think it's a good spot. And even though they're projected to be over-owned relative to their chances of being in the top stack, the ownership is spread out pretty nicely, or I guess I should say concentrated in this lineup where it's not like all 5 hitters are going to be popular. There's ownership going to Mitch Garver, Josh Donaldson, Jorge Polanco, all 10 to 12%. Those all make sense. Like second base is not the easiest position to fill, and Polanco's pretty cheap. Donaldson's underpriced at 4,200. Garver is a catcher at 4,500 that has power. But then you move down and, Brent Rooker at 2,900, 8.5% owned. I think it was you and I that talked about him yesterday, but he's sitting second again today. He projects to be a pretty decent power hitter. And Tyler Alexander is a left-handed pitcher that just does not really miss bats, does give up some power. So I think he looks like a good value option. I love Miguel Sano whenever he's facing a pitcher that doesn't miss bats and gives up power, because Miguel Sano will swing and miss against pretty much anyone, but Alexander at least does, lower the chances of that happening with a 19.6% strikeout percentage since 2019 against righties. So it's just a spot where I think that he struggles with right-handed power. The entire Twins lineup is right-handed with the exception of Max Kepler, who's a good hitter in his own right. So I like getting to the Twins. I think there's a lot of different ways you can do it as well.
A couple of news items that just came out before we go further. First, Aaron Judge is in the Yankees lineup today. He's going to be batting second. And then something else here is that the Pirates are going to be opening with Luis Oviedo. So I'll give you a second to pull up his numbers and I'll read them off. And then we can talk about what we think of the Brewers as a stack. And then we'll get back to the games that we're talking about because this was information we were missing earlier in the show. So Luis Oviedo has not had any success this year at the big league level pitching for the Pittsburgh Pirates. Didn't have any success in the minor leagues either. So we've seen him pitch 18 innings, small sample size, but still in those innings, 7.23 ERA, 6.15 expected ERA. If you look at the Zips projection for the rest of the year, they have him projected for a 6.01 ERA. In AAA this year, also very small sample size, only 9 innings, but he had an 8 ERA and a 4.37 FIP. All this considered, this looks like it's going to be a favorable matchup for the Brewers on paper. I'm curious to see where they end up being in terms of ownership, where they come out, but this looks like it's going to be a pretty favorable spot for the Brewers. And at least as of now, they're only project for 2.6% ownership. If that holds, the Brewers are a team I would want to stack.
Did we get anything on who's coming in after him? Like, I assume it's going to be Oviedo followed by Ponce. Because Oviedo is only going 1 or 2 innings based on what he's done all season long.
I didn't see anything. I just saw News God post that it's going to be Oviedo pitching. So I'm not totally sure if we know who's coming in behind him.
Actually, let me double check. So he hasn't pitched in the majors since June, making sure he didn't get stretched out at AAA. Because if he did, then I would really like Milwaukee. Two and a third on the 20th, 3 innings on the 14th. It's still hard to think you're getting more than like 2 or 3 innings from Oviedo here. My assumption is that then Cody Ponce comes in behind them, but I don't know. The way I'm looking at it right now is Milwaukee's not getting a lot of ownership. We know that Oviedo hasn't been good this season. Cody Ponce hasn't been great either. So even if he comes in after him, it's not like it's the end of the world, even though he probably is long-term a better pitcher. For the season, Cody Ponce has a 2.7 K minus BB percentage, which is awful. 6.1 xFIP. Like, he's not been good either, at least at the major league level. In his 3 appearances at AAA, he's been okay. But it's overall, I think it's a high upside spot for Milwaukee that just isn't getting much ownership. So I do like going to them. It also looks like it's supposed to be pretty warm in Pittsburgh, which is nice.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll add to this too is, let's say that Oviedo's numbers are awful from what we've seen of him this year. He doesn't project well either. Let's say that he goes out and gets hit really hard in the first couple innings. There's no longer any incentive for the Pirates to bring in their best bullpen guys after him. Now, there's a ton of great bullpen guys in the Pirates pen, but this could be a game where if they get behind early, which it seems like based on Oviedo's numbers, there's a pretty good chance of that. And like you all said, Ponce hasn't pitched all that well this year either. This could be a spot where you just see them bring in like, hey, here's our long relievers. We're punting this game. So considering the ownership is low on the Brewers, I think it's a stack to get to. Those would be really my main points there. Just 2% projected ownership for a team I think has a much greater chance than that of being a top stack. So I think like 5 to 6% ownership for the Brewers as a stack, that would be reasonable. That's probably something I'll be going down at their current ownership numbers. Next game here, the Colorado Rockies against the Los Angeles Angels. It is Jose Suarez on the mound for Los Angeles, Austin Gomber on the mound for Colorado. I'll start with this. I don't have interest in either of the pitchers in this game.
I have a little bit in both, because they're cheap and I think that they're decent. Gomber has struck out about 25% of hitters outside of Coors Field this year. Actually, let me double check that because I was going from memory, but I think his strikeout numbers have been better. But either way, he's been a decent pitcher like all season long. Outside of Coors, 25% strikeout percentage, 6% walk percentage. In Coors, 20.5% strikeout percentage, 8% walk percentage, 3.51 xFIP outside of Coors. He threw 71 pitches his last time out, which was his first appearance in about a month because of a forearm injury. I'm assuming you can get like 85, 90 pitches from him here. I don't love picking on the Angels, but I do think Gomber's just a little bit underpriced here. He's another one of the pitchers where, he's $400 more expensive than Jordan Montgomery. He's getting 25% of the ownership. Montgomery is twice as likely to be a top 2 pitcher, and Gomber's, getting 1/4 of the ownership. So I think Gomber is another just low-owned pivot you can use in tournaments. And I kind of feel the same way about Suarez just because he is facing this terrible Colorado team. It's not any sort of a priority, but at 7,300, don't mind getting to him. He threw 73 pitches his last time out, 88 the game before that, 75 the game before that. So I think expecting somewhere around 5 innings or so is fair on Suarez.
All right. Well, you answered my follow-up question. I was going to ask you how deep you expect him to go into the game. He has only made 3 starts this year, but we have seen him throw as many as, like you said, 88 pitches. To me, I'm not going to be getting to Suarez just because it's a big slate, and I generally don't like to roster guys on this large of a slate that aren't going to go deep into the game. But it is a matchup against the Rockies, and the Rockies offense, as we've said many times this year, are terrible on the road and just terrible kind of in general. Some of their numbers get inflated because they play half their games at Coors Field, but it's still a team with one of the worst WRC pluses in baseball and not a good road offense. So that in itself would be some reason to consider Suarez. He just isn't going to quite make the cut for me because I don't know how deep he's going to go into the game. But offense in this game, I don't really want to stack against Austin Gomber. At the same time, I'm hardly ever rostering the Rockies offense unless they're in Colorado.
Yep, pretty much the same boat I'm in. And to to echo your point, I agree. Like, I don't necessarily think I'm getting a lot of either pitcher. They just look like guys that are, like, I guess for lack of a better word, profitable plays. Like, they're getting less ownership than they deserve, but it's also not like ownership needs to. it's about the context of your entire lineup. So like you're going to have a lot of lineups where you just have low owned bats, and then you're going to take a pitcher that projects a little bit better than Gomber despite the ownership. So or than Suarez. But I just thought they were worth a mention because again, I just think there's too much ownership going to a few guys on this slate. And I'm with you on the offenses. I'm not really looking to pick on either guy. If I went to one side, it would be the Angels just because they have better hitters. But I have respect for Gomber, and then on the other side, I just hate the Rockies.
3 games left to talk about. But first, if you guys want access to all the tools that Adam and I are referencing on the show, especially stuff like Top Stacks tool, Top Pitchers tool, all our ownership projections, you get access to everything we have to offer for every DFS sport by signing up for an Awesemo Plus weekly pass. That will be $29.95. But if you want to get 25% off your first sign up for an Awesemo Plus package, use the promo code MLB Deeper Dive. That is MLB Deeper Dive, all one word, all capital letters. That'll get you 25% off your first week of Awesemo Plus. And if you're only looking to play MLB DFS, you can sign up for an MLB Plus weekly package for $15.95. Stop guessing, start winning. Join Awesemo Plus today. All right, next game here, the Los Angeles Dodgers against the San Francisco Giants. Let's talk about Julio Urias because he's another guy who I think makes for a really good pivot off of some of these more popular starting pitchers. In particular, we talked about Kenta Maeda, all the ownership that's going to him. I would like to move some of those shares over to Julio Urias. I understand the Giants have had a really good offense this year, but I'm still expecting some regression going forward. And if you look at Urias's numbers for the year, they've been solid. 3.63 ERA, 3.7 expected ERA, 26.5% K rate. He's also a guy, really well-regarded prospect. And it's funny because Julio Urias has been in the league since 2016. There was a point in time where he was considered one of the best pitching prospects in baseball. We talked about guys and their pitching prospect viability earlier in the show, but Urias is a guy who, for all intents and purposes, we kind of still consider a pitching prospect at only 24 years old, even though he's been in the big leagues for a while. I'm still really bullish on him, and I do like this spot, even though it's kind of a tough matchup.
Yeah, I think the park helps to mitigate the relatively difficult matchup against the Giants. And then you're just not getting a ton of ownership on him either. And it's almost like there's like a stigma around Julio Urias at this point, because like you said, he came up so long ago, it feels like he's failed, even though he just had some injuries. And then you had, as a result of those injuries, you had, Urias being kind of an opener going like 3 or 4 innings. And so it's easy to just kind of like write him off as someone that doesn't have the upside, but that just hasn't been the case anymore. He's going 6-7 innings in his starts consistently. He's throwing around 90 pitches through 101 3 starts ago against Miami. So I don't really have any concerns with him here outside of the fact the Giants are a pretty good offense. But the park is great to pitch in. It's supposed to be like 65 degrees tonight. And Urias just not getting as much ownership as some of the other pitchers around him. He has a better chance of being a top 2 pitcher than Shane McClanahan, and he's getting half the ownership. He has a better chance of being a top 2 pitcher than Maeda, who's only $800 less, and he's getting a third of the ownership. So I really like Urias here.
Yeah, he's one of my favorite tournament pitchers on the slate. Overall, my 3 favorite tournament pitchers right now relative to ownership, and let me just refresh to make sure nothing's changed, but it is Robbie Ray, Julio Urias, and Dylan Cease. Those are all guys we've talked about so far, all guys that I think are going under-owned and make for reasonable pivots. Is there anything there that you really disagree with?
No, I'm on the same ones.
Yeah, so just talk about Urias. I think it's a really strong spot. I don't want to stack the Giants against him at all. I think Urias is good. And then the Giants offense, while I do think they have a better offense than expected coming into the year, like I said, it's an offense I expect to regress going forward. But walk me through the Dodgers offense in this spot against Logan Webb, because the Dodgers are a little bit banged up right now. It's also a team that's a little out of sight, out of mind, because with the injuries they've had to Cody Bellinger, Mookie Betts, we just don't have anybody rostering this team today. So 0.6% projected ownership for the Dodgers today. The only teams that are projected for less ownership are the Mets at 0.5%, the Giants at 0.5%, and then I think there might have been one other. But either way, they're among one of the lower-owned offenses on the entire slate. Is this a team that, even with all the injuries, you might be willing to get to just because of how low the ownership is?
So one quick update. Tyler Anderson trade has been delayed. He's now throwing in the Pirates bullpen, so I don't know what to make of that. But yeah, so here it's weird because I think Logan Webb has a pretty high ceiling. I think he's a good pitcher. I think that the Dodgers being banged up is beneficial for him. Obviously, I like the park. He comes in with a 25% strikeout percentage, not getting ownership at 6,900. He's in that Austin Gomber bucket where on smaller slates, I'd really like him. Here, if I get some, I'm happy. But on the Dodgers side, it's kind of like nobody's going to Webb, nobody's going to the Dodgers. You have a pitcher with a 25% strikeout percentage, and you have a lineup that, even though they're banged up, they still have a lot of power and can do a lot of damage. there's upside on both sides, and nobody's really taking any of it. So I don't, on a slate this big, I don't anticipate the Dodgers being my highest owned stack. I certainly don't anticipate Webb being my highest owned pitcher by any means, but I do think it's not going to be that difficult to get a little bit overweight on both teams if you're playing multiple lineups. Or
Yeah,
both,
I'm sure.
both tops, I should say.
I'm trying to find more information on the Tyler Anderson thing, but yeah, I just found this one. Beat reporter for the Pirates, Jason Mackey, said, so Tyler Anderson wearing Pirates gear is throwing in the bullpen. Totally bizarre situation. Obviously now all the stuff we said before about this potentially being a good spot for the Brewers, that could go out the window if it ends up being Tyler Anderson starting. But also, guys, all the more reason. Stick around after we're done. Also, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, because Live Before Lock coming up next, and they will have a better idea of who's starting for the Pirates. Because so far, Adam and I have gone through the Pirates 2 times, and it appears to be a swing and a miss on who's pitching for them both times. So
feels like a nice 15 NBA slate at this point.
Yeah, it would be good to get an update on who's starting for one of the teams, because it is a little bit of a mess right now. Next spot here, it is going to be Lance McCullers against the Seattle Mariners. Chris Flexen on the mound for Seattle. I don't think Chris Flexen's any good. We need to talk about McCullers here a little bit. He's a pitcher that I do like paying up for. Not massively different from the field. If I am going all the way up to one of the most expensive pitchers, my priority is Robbie Ray. I do feel a little bit snake bitten by what happened with Luis Garcia last night, where he was cruising along, looked really good against the Mariners, and then all of a sudden Seattle scored a ton of runs in a hurry. I don't expect something like that to happen again, but Lance McCullers worth being in the player pool. I'd rather roster Robbie Ray if I'm choosing between the two.
Yeah, it's one of those where I think if I have like a low-owned lineup, I'm going to be more inclined to go to McCullers, but I like the idea of pivoting to Ray for ownership. McCullers feels safer, but like I don't even know if that's true, because like the idea of safety in baseball is just so crazy anyway, because there's so much volatility. Ray has the higher strikeout percentage. McCullers has the higher walk rate. The only real reason McCullers feels safer is that the Mariners are nowhere near as good as the Red Sox offensively. And, granted, that is something. There's a reason the Mariners have a 3.6 implied run total and the Red Sox are at 5.2. But from an upside perspective, I don't think McCullers' ceiling is any higher than Ray's. From a projection standpoint, I think that they are very, very similar. So given the discount in ownership, I do just slightly prefer Ray between the two, but I would expect that I come in around the field on McCullers as well, just because I do think he's one of the best pitchers on the slate.
Yeah, 25% projected ownership for McCullers. No issue with him. Just that I think the outcomes for him versus Robbie Ray, we actually have Robbie Ray projected better today, and Robbie Ray's only picking up about a third of the ownership. So Robbie Ray, really tough matchup against Boston. It does bring a lot of risk to the table, but also something talked about in Robbie Ray's last start against Boston. He was like 40% owned on DraftKings, and now we're in a spot where nobody wants to roster him just because that spot didn't go well. We shouldn't have changed our opinions that much on Robbie Ray from last start to this start. Now on the mound for Seattle, we mentioned before, it's going to be Chris Flexen. Flexen, the big red flag here with him is that he does not generate any swing and misses whatsoever at this point in his career. So the strikeout stuff for Chris Flexen, he only has a 15.6% K rate. I want to see if the odds have updated, because at least earlier in the day, according to our MLB player props tool, one of the best bets we had on the board was the under on Chris Flexen's strikeout prop. Well, that odds may have changed a little bit. Yeah, and actually they have, because Chris Flexen now minus 128 for under 3.5 strikeouts. I believe he opened up at over under 4.5 strikeouts. But walk me through, how much do you like the Houston Astros as a stack against Chris Flexen? I'm just going to assume you don't have interest in Flexen.
Yeah, I don't have interest in Flexen, and I do like the Astros. They don't have a super high top stack percentage, and Flexen has, to his credit, he's done a pretty good job of limiting damage against him despite not being able to get strikeouts. So far this season, he's only struck out 16% of righties, 15% of lefties, 178 expected ISO to righties, 130 to lefties. But he just strikes me as someone that should be coming back to earth, at least to some extent. And you have an Astros team that is really dangerous and getting basically no ownership. And then on top of that, they are really cheap. Altuve, by his standards, is cheap at 4,500. Brantley is cheap. Gurriel's cheap. Alvarez is not cheap. Everyone else, Correa, 4,200. Tucker, 3,300. These are all guys that have really, really high ceilings and just aren't that expensive. So given the lack of ownership, I do like Houston as a stack that I get to. I wouldn't say top 3, but probably like 5th or 6th.
Yeah, 1.6% projected ownership. That is one of the better leverage spots on our top stacks tool, which is a free tool today on Awesemo.com. And I know some people had brought up that it was showing up as free for FanDuel, but not for DraftKings. I'd sent a message about that, and I think somebody responded to me, and it was getting Somebody was working on it. So I assume that it's fixed by now, but if not, it will be in a couple minutes. So that is free to use today, the top stacks tool. The final game on the slate to look at here, it is going to be Chris Paddack on the mound for the Padres against James Kaprielian. So let's start with the Paddack side because he's somebody who has been all over the place this year, but really more bad than good if we look at the bigger picture. And some of his bad starts have been horrendously bad. So overall for the year, 5.17 ERA for Chris Paddack, 4.5 expected ERA, 14.3% home run to fly ball rate. All 3 years of his career, he's been an above average home run fly ball rate pitcher. Even when he was good, he was a guy who gave up a bunch of homers. So what do you make of Chris Paddack now that we've seen him struggle for a little bit more of an extended period of time?
I still think he's a better pitcher than his overall numbers, but I also just don't agree with the ownership that he's projected to get here at 14% on this particular slate. Smaller slates, I'd really like it, but Oakland scares me. Like, I think their offense is dangerous. They can do a lot of damage in a hurry. But you even just looking at the top pitchers tool, the guys around Paddack, Sandy Alcantara has a slightly higher top 2 percentage. He's getting a third of the ownership. Alzolay is getting 1/15 of the ownership with a slightly lower top 2 pitcher percentage in that price range. Even Adam Wainwright, who we didn't really, neither of us are really on, he's got a higher top 2 pitcher percentage and 1/3 of the ownership. This is that same price range that Kenta Maeda is in, where there's just so many pivots, so many other ways you can go that I just don't anticipate getting to a whole lot of Chris Paddack if the ownership holds. If Paddack puts up a score that just does, outscores everyone else in this price range, so be it. I will have trouble winning tonight.
Yeah, we have to draw the line somewhere with pitchers and with offense for that matter, especially on a 15-game slate. We can't roster everybody. Paddack, I don't know why he continues to get ownership because he isn't pitching well. And the strikeout stuff as of late, here's his last handful of starts. 1 strikeout, 2 strikeouts, 4 strikeouts, 2.52. It's been a meaningful period of time since we've seen Chris Paddack with real strikeout upside. That's a real concern for me. So I don't want to be on him, especially once he's starting to get a little bit of ownership. But on the other side, as much as he struggled, do you think there's upside in targeting some of these A's bats against him?
Yeah, I do. I don't know how easy they'll be to get to just because there are so many, just stacks to go to tonight. But for Paddack, he's had issues with power this year. And like you said, the strikeout numbers aren't great either. He's got about a 22% strikeout percentage, but he's allowed a 176 expected ISO to righties, 188 to lefties since the start of 2019. This season, it's 196 to righties, 169 to lefties. But you just have so much power on the A's. Since the start of 2019 against right-handed pitching, Mark Canha's got a 198 expected ISO. Olson's at 285, Lowry's at 205, Laureano's at 206, Chapman's at 224, Moreland's at 232, Murphy's at 263. That's a lot of guys that can just do damage if Paddack is not locating well. So they'll be tough to get to because they do have about a 2% chance of being the top stack tonight, just as a result of there being so many teams. But it's not going to be difficult to get overweight on them, and they do have a ton of power in their lineup.
By the way, the Pirates lineup card has been submitted, and Luis Oviedo is listed as a starting pitcher. The Tyler Anderson trade is apparently still up in the air, but at least as of now, it seems like they're not going to risk pitching Tyler Anderson in the spot. Once again, fluid situation, could have some updates. There should be more information coming on live before lock, which is going to be right after us. But let's bring it home right here, talking about James Kaprielian, who overall I think is a pretty solid pitcher, but I can't get to him at all in this matchup against the Padres.
Yeah, same boat here. Really tough matchup. So many good options on this slate. He's just one of these guys where if this slate were smaller, I would be advocating for taking some stabs at Kaprielian, even though the matchup's difficult. But, you can't roster every single low-owned pitcher on a 15-game slate. I think he's getting less ownership than he deserves. I just don't think he'll make the cut to really get into my lineups.
Yeah, it's he's a guy, actually, there's been a bunch of slates where I've been on Kaprielian, but the Padres have a really good offense, so not looking to roster him here, but I'm not sure I really want to stack the Padres against him. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, I'm not really in a hurry to get to the Padres. They're another one of these teams that they clearly have a very high ceiling based on the talent in their lineup. But the thing that makes it difficult for me is when I start looking down towards these like middle of the pack offenses that I don't think are in very good spots. If I'm going to go to them, I would rather go to ones that are facing pitchers that are getting ownership. So that's why like the A's, even though the Padres have a slightly higher chance of being the top stack than the A's, I ideally would rather get to Oakland first because you're knocking off 15% of the field if they light up Paddack. Whereas if Kaprielian pitches poorly, it doesn't do anything for you except for what it does for the Padres bats.
All right, guys, that is going to wrap up the MLB Deeper Dive, but don't go anywhere. MLB Live Before Our Lock is coming up right after us. They're going to have information on whatever happens with the Pirates situation. Stick around, watch all that.
Jordan. And we are live. Welcome to MLB Live Before Lock. It is Tuesday, July 27th. I am Josh Engleman. I am joined by Eric Lindquist. We are brought to you by No House Advantage. And I didn't know that at first, so I looked to the left. Generally, I have it in my noodle, but I didn't. Eric, how are you?
I'm doing well. I was going to say, I'm getting back in this whole like gym routine thing. It sounds like you just got done getting after it a little bit, so much so that it's hard to get up to the fridge, isn't it?
Man, my trainer beat me up today. It had been like relatively tame, and he added a staggering amount of weight to everything that I had to do today, and was just like, best of luck to you, bud. It was hard.
To think, we pay
hard.
these people. We pay these people to just abuse us. It's not ideal, but again, for the betterment of yourself, well done.
Yeah, so we got a ton to talk about. 15-game slate. I would love to goof around on some 4-gamer and get into really weird tangents, but we really don't have that ability today. So hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell. Let's do this. Let's get the likes over 200 because we're at like 800 and change people in here. Let's get over 200. Subscribe to this channel. Subscribe to Awesemo Odds. Subscribe to Awesemo Fantasy Football. 3 channels. Do all of that at the same time. These newfangled internet computers are fantastic. You can open up multiple tabs at the same time, never even lose your place. It's great. Anyway, let's dive in and let's just talk pitching right out of the gate. Who are your top pitchers for today? FanDuel, DraftKings, if you got anybody that's checking that box on both, lead with those guys.
Well, it's going to come down to the wire here for me a little bit.
Sure.
I'm not sure what's going to happen here with Toronto. It looked like the weather was dicey earlier in the day, and then it got a little bit better. But now it's talking about the worst thing that you can see when you want to be targeting Robbie Ray is any kind of in-game weather delay. Like those are kind of the buzzwords. In-game weather delay is the disaster because if he goes out there 3 innings, you have a long wait after it. You're just dead. There's nothing you can do, especially at his salary. If he were cheaper, I think that would be one thing, but that's also going to keep his ownership down. I mean, he's 10-1 over on DK today. That's primarily where I'm playing. I really, really, really want to play him against Boston if he's going to be sub 10% owned. The strikeout stuff is just there, over 30% K percentage on the season. We know that he has a hard hit problem from time to time, but I'm willing to take that shot if I'm going to get no ownership on him here. If I get any kind of a green light in the next half hour, I'm going to be jagging up my ownership on him exponentially.
Definitely want to know if you're jacking things up today.
Wow. Okay. Well, you're the one
to be
jacked,
fair, though.
Actual jacked. Yeah. Look. Okay. Look. Easy.
Get
Jordan
the Robbie
Klein,
Ray play.
Easy. Okay.
Wait, is Jordan laughing? I didn't have.
He's just like he does this stupid thing.
Whatever I can do to pop Jordan on the back end is what I'm looking for. I'm with you on Robbie Ray though.
Popping Jordan, don't you?
See, I walked into that one and I didn't even notice it. That's the best part. I mean, just seeing Morton's ownership in comparison to Ray, like it's just an immediate. I want to flip flop those guys at a minimum in large field stuff.
Yep.
McCullers has come up a little bit for me, so I like him a little bit more than I did earlier today. But Ray at the top as a larger field GPP play, I love. Not really pulling all that much ownership on FanDuel. You liking him over there at 10K?
Yeah, I like him. I like him everywhere. If we get nothing that has to do with an in-game delay possibility, but also that's going to be what keeps his ownership down. I'm not sure he gets underneath like 5% or something as a result of that weather. It looks like this game is going to start no matter what. That's kind of the impression that we get right now. If we get news that that's not the case, you just find that $500, get up to McCullers. There's a couple of guys that we can also drop down to later on. I think Julio Urias over 8,700 on FanDuel today as well. Just kind of mix and match your bats there. 8,600 for Charlie Morton. That game locks at the exact same time here at that 7:10 p.m. Eastern time. I don't think there's any issue with that, but obviously he's kind of the chalk of the entire session here. I want to be getting to Robbie Ray if I can. I just don't know if I'm going to get the go ahead to do that from News God, 20 minutes before lock. But if I do, yes, I want him.
Any other high end options that you're focusing on for today?
So we talked about Lance McCullers. I think it's hard not to have some interest in him going up against the Seattle team. I mean, what a choke job by Houston yesterday. I think that they're going to try to find any reason they can to just give him the innings here as well. Sometimes I don't know if I ever worry about his pitch count. We're worried about injuries all the time with Lance McCullers, but 27.8% K percentage. There isn't a whole lot in terms of left-handed bats there. JP Crawford does not hit for power. He's just like a slapper speed stick guy at the top of that lineup. Kyle Seager is pretty much the only lefty with any kind of power that I'm worried about. Klinic's just been terrible here in the big leagues thus far. I'm happy to get to as much Lance McCullers as possible. If we can't go to Ray, it's not that hard to get the 300 to go to DK and make that work with him. But of course, I'm going to like him as well. But that's just where the ownership is as well. I mean, he's 23%, Morton's 29%. I like both of them, but I'm just so focused in on Ray and trying to figure out what to do with him.
So I had McCullers on my last run as basically a neutral play for ownership on DraftKings. So I don't have much of a take there. On FanDuel, though, we had Morton pretty highly owned. No surprise. He's $1,900 cheaper than McCullers. I'm happy to get to McCullers if he's only $1,300 there. I think there's more than enough value to be found at the bats that you can pay the 10.5 for McCullers. So I do actually like paying all the way up today on FanDuel to try and get a little bit different. If he's going to be holding 13% ownership, I'm more than okay with that. I have him projected as the top scoring pitcher for today. I don't want to dodge it. So we got to start talking at least a bit. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say one thing about FanDuel specifically. Look at the top pitcher percentages for each one of these guys. I mean, the highest is Morton at 7.2, and it just drops down. It is so flat at the pitcher position. If you're not playing the ownership game, especially if you're playing in that $3.33, you're just doing it wrong because there's 72,000 entries. It's so easy to find guys. And we'll talk about my guy here in this mid-range. Dylan Cease is my highest owned pitcher on the day, and I want to just talk about that. So Dylan Cease, I just don't understand why the ownership isn't there for him. And I understand that the game environment going into Kansas City here, it's 92 degrees with 55% humidity, but that implied run total is still under 4.5 here that I'm looking at for the Royals on the one side. Also, the guy has just been so good. I mean, this starting rotation for the White Sox is pretty deadly, and I don't understand why the ownership's not there for him. Maybe it's just kind of a weird price range, but he limits hard contact, 36% hard hit percentage, 29.5% K percentage. Yeah, he can walk dudes from time to time. It's still sub 10%, so not apocalyptic, not like an Ohtani spot where you're really freaking out if he starts putting guys on base. He still has the capability of getting there. I just think Dylan Cease is probably the most underrepresented pitcher on this entire slate by kind of a long shot for me.
I don't disagree with you. I sort of understand why the ownership is happening the way that it is. You have Maeda just sitting there in the 30s, and even Paddock to a lesser degree in like the teens, and everybody's just getting funneled to this low 8 spot. And then I think you just have a lot of guys that should be picking up more ownership instead of Maeda pulling that massive amount. Like if you're playing a cash game, yes, more than okay with Maeda being that option. But whether that's Cease, my boy Sandy, even Alzolay at no ownership whatsoever, like all of those guys are guys that I'd like to have 5, 10, depending on which one it is, Cease at 15%, guys that you can pretty easily get to and redistribute ownership in GPPs. It's baseball, not basketball. I don't need to, like, do I think Kenta Maeda is the best point per dollar option in that range? I do. That's not necessarily what I'm looking for in a large field GPP. So I love the Cease call. I heard the guys before us talking about it a bit. I have no qualms going there. Do you feel the same way about Cease on FanDuel? He's $8,200. Maeda's $100 more expensive. Charlie Morton, $400 more expensive. And I think that's probably where it gets a little dicey. I'd have a tough time going to Cease over Morton, other than the fact, same situation as DraftKings, you get that ownership discount again.
You're getting a huge, it's not just in ownership discount. It's, a quarter of the field that's going to be rostering Morton today on FanDuel, as opposed to a guy like Cease, who, for all intents and purposes, has almost identical metrics. I mean, he limits the hard contact, doesn't get in trouble a lot, is going to be facing a very prevalent righty-heavy offense here on the other side. I don't know. For me, it's shocking to see Cease just kind of being written off. I think that's kind of the reasoning for it. And then 3% over on FanDuel right now. That's just kind of wrong. 8,200. Maybe that 100 or 400 comes into play for you today. Maybe it doesn't, but I just don't see him losing out to Charlie Morton. What would it be? I mean, you're looking at 25% as opposed to Cease being around 3% right now. That's just such a wide disparity for two pitchers that seem pretty equal to me.
Are you looking at any particular value options? I mean, we got to go a little bit lower than this Maeda Paddock range. We've got Jordan Montgomery pulling the primary amount of ownership on DraftKings at 6,700. I agree with it. It gets kind of dicey at the bottom. Do you have a guy?
So I kind of have a guy. So I don't have a Tuki Toussaint from Sunday where I was just like, you should be jamming this guy and everything. And then he ended up being like 16%. And I almost like fell out of my chair because he was like 3% projected all day. And, I wasn't even like double the field on him. It was so weird to me. I think Jose Suarez might be the guy. If you're looking at like nobody's going to play him at 7K. I love targeting Colorado with just about anybody. I mean, they are just an abysmal offense here. 7,300 over on DK, 7K over on FanDuel here. We're seeing those pitches kind of be a little bit variable. 88 pitches against Seattle on the 11th, 20 on the 20th. Sorry, we had 73 pitches on the 20th here of July as well. I mean, he almost worked to that 6 innings pitch. So, I mean, if you're looking at the quality start over on FanDuel, definitely an important thing to kind of be considering. I just love targeting Colorado at just about every single turn. I mean, their WRC plus numbers up against lefties on the season, 90 over there. ISO 169. They're a little bit better against lefties, 20.9% K percentage. I will also say you could be looking at a spot here. I don't know. I don't even want to say, but Trevor Story, just always be on the alert here for some of these night hammer guys. You never know when guys are going to get traded. He also got banged on the hand last night, and I'm shocked he is in the lineup whatsoever today. He took a big hit. I was watching that Angels game, and Ohtani hit him directly on the hand. He ended up staying in the game, and that was just kind of shocking to me. But I love targeting Colorado. I'm going to continue to do it.
I have one guy that I want to touch on. 6,900, Logan Webb, just a guy that I'd be willing to do a slight pivot on from Jordan Montgomery. Although, I do think Montgomery's ownership is proper. I think Webb is a little underrepresented here. I really like the situation. Maybe not the situation. Facing the Dodgers is really hard. That's a very good lineup. They're loaded from top to bottom, or at least top to bottom, generally speaking. But pitching in San Francisco is a major, major benefit. And that could nerf a lot. I mean, we're talking about like a 90 park factor for righty home runs, 85 for lefties. It neutralizes power. It neutralizes some of the best things that the Dodgers do. If Logan Webb is 2% owned, I think that's probably a bit too low for a slate like this.
we're still, I get it, because Logan Webb, I think, is just a good pitcher. I mean, he's a really good pitcher. You're betting on the talent there. My biggest issue is LA is starting to get back to full strength here. I mean, Chris Taylor, Muncy, Turner, Smith, Bellinger, Pollock, that is your best 1 through 6 available when you don't have bets there. McKinney and Raley, or whoever ends up being on the back half of that. Yeah. So that's who it ended up being there.
Yeah, I was going to say, it just came out.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's who I had projected in. So that's nice. I don't have to change anything for them. Not that I'm going to be getting to a ton of them, because again, I think Logan Webb is a good pitcher. It just feels like a spot where I maybe don't have to be going to either side of it here. I mean, the Dodgers, you're kind of doing the pay up to be contrarian thing there, because the top half is just so expensive over on DK. Chris Taylor's been carrying this team on his back, put the team on his back. Chris Taylor, 5.2K, 5.4K for Max Muncy, Justin Turner's 5K. All of these numbers in San Francisco, not exactly the best prices to be paying there, but I get it. If you want to try there, it's a potent offense. It can hit a bunch of home runs, but Logan Webb's just good. So I don't mind your play there at all.
Okay. Any other pitchers you want to touch on before we move on?
Can I interest you in some Dane Dunning at 7,700 over on FanDuel? Like, Dane Dunning is a pitcher that I just really, really like. I think over on DK 6,400 going up against Arizona, another team that's just kind of inept at the plate. Arizona, going to both of these teams, sometimes that's really what you're looking for. An 81 WRC plus, second worst in baseball against right-handed pitching here, 24.3% K percentage, only a 134 ISO, tied for the worst in baseball with the Pittsburgh Pirates. You don't want to be tied with the Pittsburgh Pirates doing anything up against righty pitching here. Not ideal, not a great spot for them. But Dane Dunning, for the most part, I think is a pretty serviceable arm. I think that there's still some room for improvement for him. Got a decent enough pitch mix. And I just like getting to him in some of these spots. Only a 388 expected slugging, kind of middle of the road. So at 6,400 over on DK, he's an SP2 I'm falling on in large fields quite a bit.
I have him at a 6% frequency. We have him owned at 2%. So sign me up as a mild under-owned play. I'm with you.
Okay. I'll take it.
That work?
I just don't see the difference between him facing Arizona inept and Kenta Maeda facing Detroit. Like, for me, that's kind of part of it too. And I'm saving 1,800 in this spot for the faux savings, for the faux impression that Maeda is somehow secure. And if you're playing cash games, I'm not saying don't play Maeda, but for me, it just feels like a no-brainer than in large field stuff. If you're trying to get up to Toronto, if we're going to get the go-ahead to be able to play them, like, this is your path, is finding somebody down there on the bottom end. Let's just target Arizona every single time.
I think you'll agree with the data that I have right now, and you'll be like, yep, that is exactly why I like this. Kenta Maeda projected for 36% ownership. Dunning projected for 2%. I have them at 19% and 6%. I think that's a much more reasonable ratio between the two than the massive 18-1 that we're seeing right now. So yeah, we're on the same page there with Dunning.
I appreciate it.
Schedule coming up for the rest of the night is this. I know that was probably an awkward silence, but there aren't any more shows, so I didn't have anything to promote. I'm sorry. We don't have any more shows. Watch all our video on demand stuff. That's going to be largely on the Awesemo Odds and Awesemo Fantasy Football channels, but you're still seeing stuff poke up on the normal Awesemo channel, but you need to be going there. You need to be subscribing. That's how you get the good stuff, and to our podcast feeds as well. But we do have free content. I'm not going to give you a pause here because that actually does exist today. MLB Top Stacks is free today. Go ahead and browse to it right now, because guess what? We're about to talk about our favorite stacks for today. PGA Top Golfers as well, free for the Olympics. You do not want to miss it. I talked a couple good bets on PGA Contenders, which I believe is not out yet, not on the breakfast menu. Eric, talk about a little tiny bit. Who do you like for the Olympics for golf?
Oh, man. So yeah, I'm going to be on the Live Before Lock show tomorrow. I'm looking forward to this, because if people don't know, if you want to have something to cheer for over the course of this week, there are two guys from South Korea who, if they get a medal of any kind, gold, bronze, silver, whatever, they avoid 2 years of military duty. Like, do you understand? Is there anything that you can do that's higher stakes? If you wanted to ever cheer for a dude in your entire life, Sung J M at 9K over on DraftKings is a guy that I'm landing on quite a bit. more of a result. So this is a short field event where we're only looking at like 60 guys in the entire field. And I would say a good quarter of them are damn near unplayable. So you're looking at like 45 guys that it's pretty concentrated. Justin Thomas is my pick to win. Justin Thomas goes over to, South Korea and just dominates all the time. I think Japan, this golf course seems like it's going to be one you want to just kind of be hitting the ball high, carrying it pretty darn far. And his putter has kind of been what's really let him down of late, but these are some gigantic greens. He's always been a really good lag putter. Justin Thomas is somebody that if he can just get that part of his game down, everything else seems to be trending up for him. One of the best, probably him and Morikawa, 1-2 best iron players in the world. So sign me up for some Justin Thomas and some Sung JM because I want to cheer for that guy.
Interesting that you went that direction. We'll get back to baseball right now with some top stacks. Ben went to JT as an outright in the betting video. Spoiler alert for everybody. I took Siwoo Kim in a head-to-head against Higo. And oddly enough, that was a coin flip for me, and that felt pretty good. So a different source that I was using had that as a significantly better bet than a coin flip. So I snagged that one immediately. So for part of the same reason, too. Like, I don't think it was added in that he's playing for not being in the Korean army for 2 years. So I don't know how you I don't get the sense that anybody. Yeah, I don't get the sense that anybody put that sort of like checkbox in their model.
How do you hold your putter? How do you even hold your putter if you have a putt on the 72nd hole, like a 10-footer, to avoid 2 years of military duty?
Dude, I truly don't get, like, what would have to be, if you're in mild contention, I don't even know how sick or something, how wrong something would have to be with me. It was like, my hand hurts. Just cut it off, man. I got to get out there. Like, maybe I'll get out of my military duty that way.
One-handed, just whatever you got to do. I got to do it. Yeah, they're going to be grinding. That's the other nice thing that is that if they're not playing well, they're going to try no matter what because you're going to get it.
All right, let's talk a little bit about top stacks, and we do have a mild piece of information that just popped out. Jock Peterson scratched 2 minutes ago, so redo your Braves lineups right now. They were my number 3 stack on the day, although I had them a little bit over-owned. Who are your top stacks for today?
Really, Jack Peterson was in my main lineup. He was my 5-2-1 over on DK. He was my one-off at 3,300. I absolutely loved him against Eickhoff. But if we're just talking stacks here, for me, I'm going back to the Houston Astros. I know that they're in the evening game going up against Seattle. I know that it's not the prettiest thing in the entire world, but why are their prices so cheap for such a potent offense? I don't understand it. It was the same case that I made for them yesterday. And I don't think anything has changed other than this is just a much more gigantic slate. But I mean, a 4.7 implied total in Seattle. Don't see that every single day. And Kyle Tucker, 3,300. Michael Brantley, 3K over on DraftKings. Correa's 4,200. You have Altuve, 4,500. You get some salary savings in the 7-hole with Toro, 2,600 at third base. They make it so easy to pay up to get to the Ray or McCullers, whichever one I'm going to end up on a little bit more here as we get down to the wire on it. Pairing them with Cease, pairing them, with the Kenta Maedas of the world. I just think Houston is going very, very underrepresented on this slate. And so I know that that's probably a strange one to throw out right away, but I'm doing a lot of 3-max stuff today, and they are a big part of what I'm doing.
So I do think they're going a bit underrepresented. I think the two teams that we need to talk about most right now, the Toronto Blue Jays, who are massively at the top of our top stack tool, a gap that is close to double any other team. I have them as my number 2 stack. I do admittedly have them as mildly over-owned. Not going to be the worst idea in the world to still have Blue Jays. They're fantastic.
So who's number 1?
For me?
Yeah.
That would be the most over-owned team on the slate, the Chicago Cubs, who are just massive negative leverage per the top stack tool. They are second in our top stack tool, but pulling the clear top ownership share. What is your approach on someone like the Chicago Cubs today, who are basically doubled up in their top stack odds with ownership?
Play them in cash. We are playing large field GPPs. And how do you get different? And again, this is just looking at this lineup. It is atrocious. Ortega is atrocious. Bodie, Hayward, Horner, Happ, everybody on the back end, I just hate. I think the thing that you do if you want to be rostering Cubs is you just focus on 2 through 4, get your exposure to Bryant, Rizzo, Contreras. Every single one's underneath 5K. I think mixing, matching them in like 5-3s, 5-2-1s, even as one-offs in some spots, it doesn't seem like something you should be doing that often, but I promise you in the long run, just finding ways to get different with some of these popular teams, I think those are the guys you want exposure to. I find it hard to believe that I'm going to get burned by Jason Hayward today in the 6-hole, or, Nico Horner, Ian Happ. He has enough pop maybe, but like, I just don't see it with these other Cubs. I find it difficult to want to be getting there in any kind of crazy bulk. And if everybody wants to be going to the Wrigley win narrative, sure, go ahead. But I think you just want to focus it around 2 through 4 and move on with your day.
Jordan in chat said, Cubs are out of playoff contention. No thanks. Oh, man, it's July 27th. If you're going to be cutting people out that are out of playoff contention, you're going to be really limiting the amount of people that you can roster. There is context on a day-to-day basis. So, yeah. Look, I like them a lot. To me, massively over-owned. They're a team that I would likely end up being very light on in large field tournaments. In smaller field stuff, I don't think it's as crazy. But if you're going big field, I can't be there. I get the ownership on Toronto. I think they're still slightly over-owned. We have them just very slightly over-owned. But if I'm going to anybody at the top in terms of my personal list, and they're under-owned, the Phillies and the Padres are the 2 teams at the top of my list right now.
Okay, for me, it's Washington, just slightly. They're going a little bit under-owned. I absolutely love getting to the main core here of Washington. Also, just been pretty good of late. Not that that's something that I really care that much about. Hot streaks, cold streaks. We don't really have streaks. It's not a thing. Just I really like getting to Washington here in this spot. The other team that I would probably throw into the mix, and they're not very good here, Milwaukee. I mean, we're going to see what kind of happens here. I'm not sure that their ownership gets kind of out of control. Lorenzo Cain now in the 7-hole, just showing up here. First game back here. No Yelich. This could be an interesting spot to get a little bit more Milwaukee than the field. I'm not sure who's going to be starting pitching here. I guess it's going to be Luis Oviedo now. That's going to be a short-lived experience for him, and I wish it were longer. 7.23 ERA, 1.77 WHIP. Those are not good numbers for pitchers. Definitely be looking at Milwaukee kind of going a little bit overlooked.
By the way, I don't want to poop on your Nationals take. I do have the Nationals 1 ranking spot ahead of the Phillies. So I have the Nats 4th. Okay. I have the Phillies 5th. The Phillies were just pulling a little bit less ownership. So I was trying to put out somebody that I considered to be like a maybe a little bit more of a leverage stack. But yeah, I have the Nats as my number 4 overall on DK. So I'm with you. I love that game in general for hitters. Mm-hmm. Are there any value stacks that you're looking at right now that aren't pulling a ton of ownership? Because we've got someone like the Cubs, who are the top value stack, pulling all of the ownership for today. Minnesota, Atlanta, Pittsburgh, some of the other teams that are ranking at the top. Atlanta, though, not pulling any ownership. Or sorry, Pittsburgh, rather, not pulling any ownership.
Yeah, Pittsburgh's fine. It's just so hard to see in this spot. I mean, they have a 1.4 top stack percentage. Yeah. I don't know. I feel like we can probably do a little bit better. Every single team on the board here, it feels difficult for Pittsburgh to be the team that'll really kind of get to the top on this slate. I would be more inclined. It's weird to call him even a value stack, but I mean, Houston is a value stack just where these salaries are at. Other than Alvarez, nobody is prohibitive of rostering on that team. So just want to go back around to them. I'd also say the White Sox. I can't believe that they're not getting more leverage. They ended up getting Eloy Jimenez back. He ended up failing his super chalk yesterday, which was beautiful. But now facing Brad Keller. Brad Keller, very, very bad at throwing baseballs as well. Happy to be going to Moncada, Eloy Jimenez, Gavin Sheets in the 5-hole, Andrew Vaughn again, Brian Goodwin. It seems like a team that in that 4 through 9, there's a lot of value to be had over on DraftKings. I'm happy to open it up a little bit to the White Sox. 5.6 implied team total. Same fantastic hitting environment. 92 degrees, 55% humidity. I'm shocked that their ownership is not higher.
Is there any other team that you want to mention before we get out of the stacks? We start taking a look at some individual positions.
Cincinnati has to at least be talked about. So
okay.
Alzolay, if we're going to be going to all these Cubs, if everybody's going to be rostering them, I understand Alzolay's a better pitcher, but it's the same game environment. It's the same hitters. They get the 9th inning bump. It's a bunch of lefties going up against Alzolay, who has a 454 expected slugging on the season. So at the same time that he can K guys and be a decent enough pitcher, he does give up a little bit of launch angle too, 10.6 degree average launch angle on the season. Why wouldn't we be looking at the Cincinnati side and getting over the field in this spot too?
I do like most of this field, actually, more than our current ownership. You I don't want to say you have to leave Jesse Winker off because they're not getting enough ownership for it to matter, but Winker is the guy that's pulling ownership and probably putting them in a tier higher than they should be because he's at over 10%. Everybody else is 4% or below. So if you're talking about like a 1 through 5 stack here, I'd be more than okay doing that. And if you want to swap somebody out and bring someone like Tyler Naquin in, get a little bit more pop, I think that's more than viable as well. He's only 2,800 as an outfielder. I think you can get to the red stack. I will say I have them 17th, which, given the size of the slate, isn't too crazy. Middle of the pack. If you're trying to find a little leverage, I think it's there, or I think it can be there at least, especially in that game environment.
Yeah, that's for me. It's just targeting the upside of the game environment. Same narrative exists there. We've seen better pitchers get lit up with the wind blowing out in Wrigley. Obviously, Vladimir Gutierrez is the main attraction of that game with the Cubs bats, but I'm not going to touch any of them today and hope that I don't get completely burned by it. Might have a little bit of Contreras here when I do the next run just because of the catcher position on DK, but very unlikely I get to much Brian or Rizzo as well, even though I do think that they're the other two you would want out of this Cubs team. I'm just hoping that it's Cincinnati instead.
One more reminder, hit that like button. We just now snuck over 200, but we're dangerously close to 1,000 people in here. Maybe we can get to 250, 25% of the likes. That would be fantastic. So hit that thumbs up. Did you know that you could use the promo code MLB Live Before Lock? That is one gigantic word. It's actually 4 separate words, but you push them all together and take out all those spaces. You type that in at Awesemo.com. You can get 25% off your first week of Awesemo Plus. Projections, ownership, Slack, lineup builder, top stacks tool, top pitchers tool, everything for every sport that exists. You get it with that promo code. Just because it says MLB in the title doesn't mean it's just baseball. You get 25% off your first week of everything we've got. If you've ever been interested in taking a look behind the paywall, I think now would be a great time. Get yourself a little bit warmed up. We've got NFL coming very, very soon. Get an idea of how to operate on the website. Get an idea where everything is so that you can attack week 1 of the NFL season. And I'm sure we'll have some sort of NFL promo coming up. But for right now, MLB Live Before Lock, 25% off your first week. All right, let's take it position by position. Let's hit what we've got. Let's start at the catcher spot. Obviously, this is going to be more of a DraftKings question. Not that you can't roster a catcher on FanDuel, but a little bit different, so you don't have to prioritize it. Who are your favorite catcher options for today?
So, I mean, the chalk is Contreras, but I'm going to just kind of get myself away from the Contreras ownership, probably away from the Garver ownership as well. 4,500. He's come back. He ended up getting put on the paternity list right after, but came back off the IL and was fabulous here in the last couple. We've seen some upside out of him, but still just a little bit too much ownership for me today. I'm going to a lot of Stevenson. He's in the 3-hole today for Cincinnati up against Alzolay. I think that's kind of intriguing. He doesn't carry as much pinch hit risk as some of these other pieces of Cincinnati, specifically Naquin, those kind of guys that just always seem to keep getting pinch hit for quite a bit. But I really like Stephen Vogt in the 6-hole going up against Eickhoff against the Mets here. Hitting catcher, 2,500 over on DK for Atlanta. I
don't have a ton of guys that are showing up as like interesting plays that aren't pulling a ton of ownership. I agree with Contreras. I agree with Real Muto. I agree with Garver, all these guys at the top that are pulling any ownership. The first guy that I have that would be like a sort of leverage play is Yadi Molina. And I'm not really like super advocating for that. I got him at 5%. We've got him owned at 1%. That's really the best that I can do right now. I would likely just have my catcher as a part of most stacks. And if I'm one-offing, it's probably at the absolute top. But we got a lot more to talk about because we are now moving on to first baseman. And I guess technically speaking, we're looking at catchers and first baseman, depending on which site we're actually playing on. Who stands out to you at first base today?
Again, you want to talk Rizzo? Go ahead. Play him. I have no problem with it as well. He's probably going to be your top first baseman. If you're playing cash games and you're not playing Rizzo, you're probably playing cash games wrong. I love Josh Bell in the 4-hole here for Washington. This is kind of my guy right now. Switch hitter here going up against Matt Moore on the one side. Just love targeting this dude. And Josh Bell, tons of power in the bat here, especially from the right side. Sign me up.
Wow. So top of my first base rankings on DK, Guerrero. Yeah, clearly. Rizzo, Freeman. None of these things are super surprising. Then we start getting into the leverage. I do like Ohtani today. He's at 3% ownership. I will happily take a shot at someone like Ohtani at that kind of ownership. You clearly need a home run or some sort of really staggering non-home run game. But whether that's Ohtani, Cronenworth coming out as someone that I think is under-owned, and then we start getting into the really weird like 4%ers. Lewin Diaz, Pavin Smith, Gavin Sheets at 3,400 if you need to pay down a little bit further. Nobody too crazy. Only Guerrero, Rizzo, and Freeman cracked 10% likelihood of being in an optimal for me.
Well,
that's what happens when you have 30 teams playing in a given day.
Yeah, and that's the way that it should work out. Sorry if I'm just getting, listing off like one or two guys. I'm trying to keep it a little bit specific, but yeah, I think on the bottom end, looking at a couple of these other dudes as well, I don't mind completely going to either one of these Seattle guys up against McCullers as leverage as well. I mean, you just have 38 and 3,300 here. McCullers has been good, but we just literally saw him get destroyed by a Cleveland lineup. That was not very good. If you're looking for like the extreme leverage spot here, I don't completely hate like a 1 or a 2 man with some of those guys. Not really been giving up a lot of bombs here, but there's some viability of going there for leverage.
I'm trying to see if there's anybody. Goldschmidt on FanDuel stands out to me as someone not pulling as much ownership as he should. Mitch Garver, on the other hand, pulling more than I expect him to. Yeah. So just want to throw those two out there right now. Any other first baseman you want to touch on?
No, let's move it along.
Yeah, we're gonna move through these pretty quickly, as we should. We can get some questions in today. I'd like to take some questions from the old audience. Let's go to second base. Floor is yours.
Yeah, Kiki's the devil. Sorry, I love these pauses we have going. I'm trying to we're playing a little double dutch today. I don't mind it.
Well, I think we're both pretty active right now. So
we are.
When I realize that I'm done talking, I'm just done talking. And
how much harder is this than NBA?
Oh, it's infinitely harder because you're slowly but surely like getting a couple extra lineups. You need to be updating that. It's not that it's harder, it's that it's more frequent. Like, yes. I'm not shocked by anything that happens. I just have to do something again. Whereas NBA, it could be like, Paul George is out. And it's like, okay, every bit of this slate has just changed. But like Jock was a problem, but ultimately, like if you're playing 150 lineups, you just take Jock out and you rerun everything and then it comes back out again. NBA, nice where it's like, I had Paul George in 55% of my stuff, and now he drank too much coffee.
Do you know who you're talking to? Chat's going to go nuts now because it's...
Yeah, that's why I brought it up.
George. Yeah. I was going to say, you're playing the Eric Lindquist drinking game. Somebody brought up Paul George drink. There's definitely that. Ozzy Albies, the chalk of the position, 4K, probably fine to be going there. I do like Atlanta so much in this spot. Didn't really even touch on them earlier. I think by the vote play, he's showing up in a number of my lineups. That probably indicates that I like Albies, Freeman, all of these guys from the left side. Jock was, my main lineup as a one-off. So I do like going to them, but Jorge Polanco's too cheap. 4,300 for him, batting leadoff now, going up against Alexander here of the Tigers. I have no problem going to as much Jorge Polanco as you want underneath 10%. That's also kind of the beauty of playing these larger slates is you can play your dudes and you're probably not going to be running into much resistance here because there's so many directions to go. On the bottom end of salary, like if we're going down to the basement here, I don't mind getting to the likes of like Tommy Edman up against Quantrill and Adam Frazier making his debut against Caprillion. I don't really like Caprillion, but I mean, Adam Frazier has been pretty underrated this season for a guy who ended up being the starting NL second baseman. So I don't mind at 3,400 making him a part of a super contrarian stack because Caprillion's so much better against righties than lefties.
I've got Semien and Albies at the top of my list. They are clearly pulling that ownership. They are likely the guys you're looking. Albies in particular is likely your second baseman in a cash scenario. Gene Segura is the first guy that I have that is under-owned. Cronenworth would be second for me as of right now. Nothing else super interesting for second baseman. I've got quite a few that I think are massively under-owned on the FanDuel side. And it's just a sea of guys that I think that are like 5 or 6% owned, should be 5 or 6% owned that are 2. It's not a gigantic leverage situation, but you can pull little bits from Cronenworth, Harrison, Rogers, Hernandez, India, Merrifield. And it's just like a huge group of second basemen. I can't go too crazy because, again, these guys are 5%ers. I don't expect anybody to succeed all that frequently. But if we're focused on the top end stuff, it's Marcus Semien, it's Ozzy Albies for me.
Love it.
And everybody's already doing that.
Yes, sir.
Sticking in the infield, third base. Who you got?
Let me get back over to it here. Because as you
Other
were
than
saying,
Chris
yeah,
Bryant.
I was doing a zillion things. Yeah, Chris Bryant. I'm just going to like write off those dudes because I think that makes the most sense. And I will say Josh Donaldson makes a ton of sense as well, but he's coming in with the third highest ownership in our last run over on DK. So that's probably going to be a pass for me. I just like getting to this guy in pretty much every single tournament. He will be completely unowned at 5,500, and I am well over the field on him today like I am every slate. But Jose Ramirez is your pay up to get contrarian guy up against Adam Wainwright. Only a 3.5 implied run total for the Cleveland Indians, but you can play him and Reyes in just about anything, anytime, and I will never, ever complain because I think he's just such an infinitely better hitter in this spot. Actually, 4.7 implied runs. I don't know why I had that different on my sheet here. I'm going to have to change that because that will matter when I have the stacks come out here. But yeah, I love getting to the Ramirez-Reyes 1-2 combo pretty much every single slate. This is no different.
Bryant goes without saying. I think David Bodie is pretty significantly over-owned, if I'm being honest. 23% feels way too high. I totally agree with your Jose Ramirez play. So I have him 6th overall, but he is the first guy that shows up that is pretty significantly under-owned. And then he's a part of this group of 4. And basically every one of these guys to me is the same play. And I totally agree with it. I want to know your thoughts. So I agree that Jose Ramirez is under-owned. Nolan Arenado, Rafael Devers, Manny Machado, the next 3 guys on my list, all not really picking up any ownership, all similarly priced. And I think you could mix and match those guys pretty easily.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. We're targeting upside. Machado up against Caprillion, probably the tougher one. I think that he does neutralize. But as you said, like Frazier, I'm cool with Hosmer. All the lefties here, I'm prioritizing. But I mean, the best hitters in the lineup are Machado and Tatis, so you have to include those in your stats in your stacks if you're targeting upside. So no problem getting there. As you said, the other dudes as well just carry significant upside at the position. Devers. Can't believe that he's under 3% here, but he's also got no risk the way that Ray has risk because it looks like that game is going to play, but that in-game delay freaks me out there. So you could be looking at getting righties out of the pen here as well. Devers in a great spot. Any
other third baseman that you want to touch on? I don't have any like crazy sneaky plays. It's hard to get those on a 30-team slate.
Yeah, because you can make a case for just about anybody because they're coming in under-owned. I will say Ke'Bryan Hayes would be the one guy we didn't talk about. He's under 4K now. He's grading out phenomenally well for us going up against Anderson on the other side. So yeah, play some Ke'Bryan Hayes in your life.
He is under-owned for me. So we're on the same page once again, which is always fun. Now, I got to quickly, before we continue, we got about 19 minutes to go before we get to lock. I got to talk a little bit about the presenting sponsor of this show. That is No House Advantage. NBA, MLB, NFL, PGA. You could play any of those types of contests for cash prizes. I mean, best of luck to you finding an NBA one. I wish that I could today, but that'll be back soon enough, I promise, and so will I. You don't have to worry about fantasy points here. We are talking about player props, and we could help you out a little bit with those player props. Check out the website too, if you want, awesemo.com. But when you go to No House Advantage, sign up using the promo code AWESEMO, AWESEMO. I promise you, most people will spell that incorrectly. You get a $20 instant match deposit bonus on that first deposit. Who doesn't want to get extra money on their money? It's a perfect way for you to try to build a bankroll. And if you're just trying to get your feet wet in DFS, I think this is a great spot to start. We got a lot of free tools on the website that will help you out. You get the extra $20. Beat your friends, not the house. Download the app in the App Store and win big with player props today. Do you have any interesting No House Advantage props? Because I do have one, if you're interested.
Yeah, I had a couple. So Yelich was at 0.5 hits, and now obviously the COVID-19 thing happened there with him. My favorite by far on the board today, Christian Walker. Let's see. Okay. I just want to double check that he's in the lineup here. He is. He's batting cleanup here for the Diamondbacks going up against Dane Dunning. I like less than his 1.5 hits considering for the entire season. Let me just pull it back up here because his batting average for the entire season on the whole is 227. I love targeting these 1.5 hits when they're just too high. Dane Dunning, I mean, you're theoretically looking for him to go 2 for 4 or 2 for 5 against him in the Rangers bullpen. Sure, within the range of outcomes, but more times than not, you taking less than on these 1.5 hits is a great place to be.
And that is exactly where I am. Juan Soto under 1.5 hits. And it's not like it makes me super excited to take someone with Juan Soto's pedigree. I have him projected for around a hit in this game. His current hits prop on the under of 1.5 is -200. So on No House Advantage, you don't have to worry about those odds. What that's telling you is that basically there's a 2/3 chance that he goes under 1.5, and you get it at what is a coin flip. That is a massive value spot for you. These are the type of things you should be looking for on No House Advantage. If there are props at 1.5 hits, the chances are the under on that play is one of the best plays you're going to find for the day. More often than not, that is going to be the case. There are multiple other bets in baseball that are just like that. In basketball, you don't see that. If LeBron James is projected for 28 points, he's pretty much going to be around 28 points. That's just how that works. In baseball, it's completely different. You could have very big extremes. The best hitters in baseball are going to go 0 for 5 some days. Take the odds. Just don't worry about it too much. That edge alone is enough to just beat a large swath of the people that are getting in those contests.
Yeah, totally agree.
That's my No House Advantage, right?
Crushed. Yeah, that's how you play the game, and you play to win the game. And Julio Jones also 4.5 strikeouts, way too low. Take more than, if you look at the MLB player props tool in the strikeouts department, 5.5 earlier in the day. I'm not sure what it is here now because as you said, we are just changing stuff here constantly. But I definitely think 5.5 was the number that I saw everywhere on OddsShopper earlier in the day. If you're giving me 4.5 on NHA today, that makes for an awesome over. Oh my God. There it is.
Red Sox Blue Jays are delayed.
Did you see your screen? Did you see this?
Did I see what?
He missed it. Josh,
what did I miss?
Go ahead and flash it, Jordan. Go ahead. This is just you hate me. So
all right. So I got to watch YouTube, right?
Yeah, you got to look at the screen. Yep. No,
I don't know if Jordan was like flipping me off in Zoom or not.
Nope. You just need to look.
I got my head to my left.
Here. Go ahead, Jordan Klein. Yeah, go ahead. And
what
more.
Is this? What? I don't even know what this is. I mean, I assume that's Peter Pan.
It's Tinkerbell, in fact.
Is that a real scene?
He just put my face on it, and yeah, I guess.
That's real, though? They spank her?
Oh,
in the movie?
I just put that together. Dude, the 1930s or 40s, I mean, those are weird times. Like, you had no rules, and everything was like cunning innuendo, as opposed to like now where, things are written to kind of like appease adults, but then they kind of shy away from the craziness. Man, yeah, Disney, no rules. Yeah, I mean, I won't say that one. That caught me really off guard. I didn't even know, like, the first thing that I saw was not your face. Hey, stop spamming the chat, EMAC. That's too many Tinkerbell. You're going to get timed out. I didn't even notice your face at first. I was like, why is that gigantic hand spanking that tall pixie or tiny pixie? That was incredibly weird. I'm reporting EMAC. There we go.
Mike Diamond just asked a question. I think we should hit on this before we get to the shortstops. We have 14 minutes to go. Are we taking Sox Jays out of the pool? I wouldn't. Like, the hitters are a different story. To me, there is a little bit of risk that this one gets postponed. I think the late start is more likely. I'll also say this. I thought the Blue Jays were over-owned before, so I was already going to be light. If that ownership comes down, it'll be a little bit interesting to me. I didn't really care all that much to be there to begin with. For the Red Sox, they are like neutral to me. Are you doing anything specific with these guys?
Other than just kind of like freak out here right now? Probably not. I'm trying to figure out what I want to do as I'm just pulling up some weather stuff, and it looks there's definitely PPD risk here in this spot. I really don't know what to do right now. I mean, we're sitting here 18 minutes before lock. I wish I had a concrete answer, but what it comes down to is if you can inherit the risk, if you can take on this kind of risk, you're going to get an under-owned Toronto and Boston team. The opportunity cost, though, is gigantic because you literally have every other team in baseball playing on the back half of this, and you can play anybody else that you want and be guaranteed to be good to go. This is the one problem spot. So how many times does Toronto get there? I mean, you're looking at the top stacks tool. I mean, they're right around 11%. That means that they're not the top stack 89% of the time. If you're fine getting them, you're going to get them much lower owned. I'd be more interested in doing it on a smaller slate than this one.
Yeah, I don't find them to be super necessary. I don't think you're going to get so much leverage out of the late start that it's going to be really worth your time to like sweat it. If you like it, I have no problem continuing to go for it. Just know you're taking on a chunk of risk. Because there's definitely there's about to be an ownership discount now.
Yep. How much though in the next, if it happened at like 3:20, so I guess, sorry, I'll speak in normal person time, 6:20 p.m. You're welcome. I think 6:20 p.m. maybe people react. We're pretty close to lock. A lot of people have their lineups in.
That's true.
I think this is probably not where you're getting a crazy ownership discount. I think if people have like one guy in their lineup, I think Kiki was a one-off that was coming in very popular in this game. I think we see the ownership come down on him, but I think the stack as a whole, I'd be shocked if we had Toronto like at 3% or 2% on this slate still. I still think they come in pretty owned. That makes me just kind of want to hit eject no matter what.
Yeah, I think they probably still hit that like 9 or 10% mark, which probably makes them neutral for top stack if you take into account the percentage that it doesn't actually happen. I'm guessing the Nats probably go up a little bit and probably pull a little negative leverage. That would be one of the first sort of spots. Two teams that are ranked pretty high, similar value metrics, so it's going to be similar salary swaps. So that might be something to keep an eye on. All right, let's actually hit on shortstops. Lots of stuff going on, man. Baseball's wild.
The Wild West for sure. Also, did we seriously, yesterday I was looking at playing Elitimus Diaz a bunch and he ended up getting in there. He's 2K flat for Houston now, but no Toro in that lineup. That's kind of messing up everything for me. So I apologize if I get quiet for a second.
Oh, you're fine. I could talk a little bit about it. No surprises to anyone here. My top shortstop is Trey Turner. He is the highest owned shortstop. Bo Bichette at second, in second, also the second highest owned. First guy that I get to that looks good to me, I don't think will be, well, he does carry a little bit of a risk, I guess, but Trevor Story is my first guy that I think is going under owned. You're obviously paying a healthy price tag at 5,600, maybe a little bit worried about his current health, but we shall see. But for right now, he is the guy that I think is most under owned at shortstop.
I love that. Yeah, you can have him facing any lefty period. I have a little bit of Suarez. We talked about him earlier in large field stuff. Story is the one hitter who's good here. For me, I saw him get hit on the hand. I'm just shocked again that he's in this lineup today. I thought for sure they would probably show some caution considering half the teams in the league would love to have Trevor Story on their team going post deadline here. But we'll see how it pans out. I as long as he's in the lineup here, there's no reason not to be rostering him.
All righty. Final position of the day. Who are your favorite outfielders on the slate? And if you have any that are your least favorite, that works too.
I think that's probably the better question because there's just so many guys that you can be rostering at this position. I mean, yesterday, I thought it was pretty concrete, straightforward that you just kind of faded Eloy Jimenez and those guys. But now we're kind of seeing that ownership spreading out a little bit more, just having more games here on the slate. I'm happy to go right back to the well on Eloy then. What is he? He's still 2.5K over on DK. He's coming in at under 15%. I think that's now the time when you probably want to be getting back into the pool with him. So Eloy Jimenez, we have such a long record of seeing what he's capable of doing as a hitter. Batting cleanup now for the White Sox against Brad Keller, who's very bad at pitching baseballs. Jesse Winker, a guy that I'm investing quite a bit considering he's around 10%. I think that he's definitely the one guy that's coming in owned on Cincinnati, but I do like Cincinnati as kind of your contrarian stack here in this spot. So I got to be giving him a shout out, but otherwise we could just go on forever at this position. I mean, there's so many guys. Ohtani, I know you love. Soto, I absolutely love. Left on left. I have no problem going left on left with Soto. I think he's probably one of the better tournament plays underneath 10%. Same thing with Bryce Harper at that upper edge. For me, Jordan Alvarez, Kyle Tucker, I end up playing just tons of them every single time. It never really fails me. So I'm going right back to them as well.
Yeah, Harper, Soto, Ohtani, all guys that I think are going under-owned here. Franmil Reyes, I guess. Guys that I think are going over-owned. Jimenez, Winker, Duvall, Ian Happ. Some of the guys at the top, but Chris Bryant is also my top outfielder, so it's not like I think he sinks or anything like that. But 25% is a lot for all 30 teams playing. That's it for outfielders. So it's time. I got to ask you, who dongs today? I need a dong pick. I haven't done dong picks in like a year and a half.
It's been a hot second for you, huh? All right.
Yeah. Ask my wife.
Whoa. Dong, 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 dong. Oh God. I don't even know why I say words. It's unbelievable. I have this job, but here we are. Shohei Ohtani. Let's just, go left on left. and Soto. Let's just take both left on left guys. Everybody has such a apprehension of going left on left. Both of them just destroy both sides of the plate. And if people are going to be getting away, Matt Moore gives up more power to lefties, which is kind of an interesting fact about him. Enjoy that for what it is. And Shohei Ohtani has more power from the left side. I don't understand either of these things. All I know is we have pre-notioned biases against left on left, and we don't have that for right on right. So I think both of them sub 5%. Give me both of them as guys going yard. Well, I guess Soto right around 10%, but still.
Juan Soto is my pick. He's putting one in the seats.
That's good for me. I'm happy. So I'm going to win the 150 and I'll send you a tip. How about that? You give me
I just
a
have to cross my fingers
Soto.
that that's his only hit. Otherwise, he will go over his no house advantage. It's an interesting balance.
But hey, playing both sides of it, honestly, you can be right. You're going to be right on one of them, or more than likely.
And just because I think he is a frequent home run does not make that bet incorrect at no house advantage. That's just how the data works. It just makes me look dumb for recommending both sides. There's a very big difference here.
I love baseball. It's the best.
It's fantastic. All right, let's get some questions in. We have 5 minutes to go until lock. Eric, scramble if you need to.
Yep.
YouTube chat, Premium Slack. I'm coming, by the way. I haven't looked at a single thing you've asked so far, so I'll get there now. And we'll hit whatever questions we can in this Oh, no, we have 10 minutes left, don't we?
Oh, we do have 10 minutes. Yeah. So yesterday, I mean,
oh God, I'm never used to that.
Yeah. Yesterday, somebody who was on the show with, it was with Eitan, my dude. I had an absolute blast with him, but all of a sudden he just wrapped it up at 4:00 or 7:00 normal person time. And I was just like, oh, well, I just didn't say anything because I thought we were just leaving. Also, it saved me 5 minutes and I got to fix my own lineup. So selfishly, I was okay with it.
I've done so much basketball content in Live Before Locks for the past, I don't know how long, before COVID, if anybody can remember that. So yeah, I'm just used to things locking at a normal time and not 5 minutes after it, which.
Hey, Josh, how'd your first show go with me? I forgot. How'd that go?
It was absolutely fantastic. I wish today were a Sunday. Maybe we could redo it again because I believe that was a Sunday.
You remember the day? Oh man, right here. There it is.
I do. And not because it was super successful for me in the NBA, but just because I did that show with you.
That's not true, but thank you.
Man, no, I was about to say, you know what? I'll say it out loud. It's funny anyway. Jordan's going to now put my face on the spanking hand person, and that's just really going to go negative for me.
Stop All right, it, Daddy.
Premium. Oh God, am I doing this show with Spags now?
I'm sorry. Well, no, I apologize. I mean, I've done too many shows with Spags. Is probably the answer to that.
R.I.P. Chris Spags.
Rip.
You watching, buddy? What's up? We'll see you soon. Maybe. I don't know.
I live in the same city as him, and he never hits me up. So that I think that's more of a telling thing about me than it is about him.
I would happily hit you up. I live more than 3,000 miles away.
See, I'm cool. I'm with it. I'm hip. Oh.
I like it. Great movie. I referenced that earlier today, and I don't remember why.
I referenced it for the entire show yesterday, which is, I think, something that people, they were going nuts in the chat asking for it. There you are. Be happy, you heathens. Be happy.
Malcolm with the super chant. I have the big GPP entry. Who for pitcher on DK? So I assume big GPP entry, you mean big dollar GPP and not big entry, because to me, that's two separate answers. Although, they're obviously like you're taking good people one way or the other, but it's different if you mean big dollar because it's not going to be as many people. Who would be your preferred two pitcher combo? Let's call it the big GPP.
I was going big GPP, big pitcher. That's kind of the way that I read that. I don't know any other way to read it. Charlie Morton, if we're trying to be secure here in this spot, 9,800 going up against the Mets. If you want to get different, I didn't even really talk about him that much, but Julio Urias, I think I touched base on a little bit. San Francisco is significantly worse against lefties for the season. They have a 202 ISO up against right-handed pitching, best in baseball. They get a little bit neutralized, which is ironic because I think last year was a little bit the inverse. But San Francisco, definitely a markedly worse team going up against left-handed pitching. 22.1% K percentage isn't anything extreme, but a serious point of leverage on this slate. Fantastic pitcher's park to be throwing in as well. I think he's going a little bit underlooked today.
I'm looking at this to see what my combo would be. If this is the legitimate high dollar stuff, I think that I feel pretty comfortable not using Maeda and that he's going to be in a lot of lineups. I feel like the best option then is something in like the Robbie Ray plus Jordan Montgomery combo, still getting a little bit of ownership, getting off of the main pitcher a little bit more, getting a little bit of leverage there. That feels like enough because I do think Jordan Montgomery is the best thing you can find at the bottom. Yes. The ownership is neutral, but if I'm going to Ray instead of Morton or McCullers, I think that makes a pretty big difference. Oh,
I agree.
Jordan, you cannot use that. No, but I do appreciate being the one on the right. That's all I can say. Chat, you'll never see this, but just trust that Jordan would have entertained you pretty well. It cannot be put on our YouTube channel right now.
Oh my God.
Not this one. Maybe if we do the show on Awesemo Odds, you can get it.
Oh man. Everybody can just kind of use their imagination on what that was. Yeah. Best of luck to you. You won't get it.
We don't have to go out and say it. However, I believe this movie won Oscars.
Won a lot of Oscars.
Yes.
It's got so many like A-name actors, actresses.
High A-list actors. That's for sure.
Oh my God. I am in pain. See, this is why I appreciate working with you. You can make fun of yourself. A lesser man would not be capable of seeing something like that and going on with their day.
No, it's going to be really sad when we get to 7:05 because I truly don't know how to quit you.
I can't quit you. Can't do it.
Jordan's done for now. I don't know if he's got 5 more minutes in him.
On the floor. He's on the floor. He's on the literal floor. We are no longer even like, oh man, we are just here to, I'm not going to say it. Almost said service him, but we are not here. Nope. We are moving on with our day.
We just got a couple pieces of information. One that we definitely need to hit on immediately. Josh Reddick was scratched.
Okay.
And then I actually have a DKGPP 2v2 from our premium Slack. Shout out to K Sizzle. Are you ready?
Let's go. Let's rock.
Suarez and Cease or McCullers and Watkins? I mean,
I didn't even like remotely. And I know Spencer Watkins has been awesome to start off here. I don't think that maintains here, but I like taking some shots on Miami. Maybe I like the Seaside so much. I'm playing so much Dylan Cease. I don't want to recommend people getting away from him because I have a ton.
I don't really like either combination.
It's probably the right answer.
I just like more options than Suarez, and I like way more options than Watkins. I assume Watkins is forced because of McCullers, but I would personally drop down from, like, if you're taking Cease, there's not really any reason for you to, one, avoid Jordan Montgomery, who I do think is the best option at the bottom, or even just go to any of the guys that I actually do like, Logan Webb, Dane Dunning. Both guys you can clearly fit in and then maybe make a change to a hitter if you need to. But in that case, if you're going to Cease, to me, Montgomery is the guy. There's no reason to skip out on Montgomery if you're already taking a 6% owned Cease.
Yeah, that's probably true. You don't need to like double leverage your leverage, I don't know the right way of saying that. You're correct.
Yeah, like I have Montgomery as my 4th favorite pitcher for today, but he's just properly owned. So and he's on an island down there. So if I'm already making the change, same situation if you wanted to go to someone like Robbie Ray. I like that combination with Montgomery because it's already not going to be that popular.
That's correct. There's nothing I can add to that.
2 minutes to go until lock. Mm-hmm. Checking YouTube chat. I see nothing. I'm checking premium Slack. Feels like Legalize is just talking to himself, which is clearly not going to help anybody in our Slack.
I love him so much, though. Honestly, he's kind of he's a character amongst the premium Slack myself. I just kind of like dabble in. It's like the Simpsons gif where he just walks in. I'll walk back on out.
Yeah, he's there. He's 2/3 of the messages that I can see. I don't see any other questions as of right now. Nobody's tagged me in anything. I don't even know what they're talking about.
I love
legalize. His last question
is out of its
how
mind.
do you do is that how you do your food shopping? So I have no idea what direction they're going. 2 more minutes to go. All right. Sammy says, how do you feel about the Cardinals? I will say this quickly, and then I'll toss it to you. They are my 9th ranked team. I do think they are mildly under-owned. They would be a team that I'd be looking to have a piece of in GPPs, but I would be getting to the Padres and the Phillies before I got to them.
I would agree with that. I think for sure. They're fine. They don't really stick out to me as like a team that I need to prioritize whatsoever on the slate, but positive leverage to be had. I'm never going to be saying no on this big of a slate when you're right around 5% top stack potential. It's just know that it's 1 in 20. Don't be like going crazy. There's a lot of places to get positive leverage on this slate, but no problem with it.
What else we got going on here? Sandy versus Baltimore. So I'll say this. I like it a lot. I have him 2x the field.
Okay. Yeah, I don't mind Sandy Alcantara. My guy is Dylan Cease. If Dylan Cease pitches poorly today, I will be underneath a bridge doing God knows what, doing, God knows where.
Probably hanging out with Legalized.
Hanging out with Legalized.
That's fired, but I don't think he's listening because he did not react to anything that I said before.
He's just not even tuned into the show. He's asking questions in premium Slack to talk to himself.
He's just talking about random stuff. Totally random stuff. But it doesn't matter because now we are officially locked. Eric, anything else you want to plug before we get out of here?
Wow. Plug, huh? That's where we're finishing it. Okay. I got to go. I got to get off this. This is too much. Jordan Klein, you have ended me. I can't quit you either. It's fine.
There it is, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Hit the like button on your way out the door. Subscribe to this channel. Subscribe to Awesemo Odds. Subscribe to the Awesemo Fantasy Football channel. Keep your eyes peeled for all the content that we will have again tomorrow because we don't ever stop. Good luck tonight, everybody. I can't quit you.
Jesus.